The old storyteller had never minded an eager audience, even when his patrons happened to be the most demanding children in Asterhold. Beneath the clock tower in the center of the city's cobblestone square, a noisy crowd of boys and girls gathered around the wooden bench where he sat. They begged him to tell the story again, insisting that it was his best tale, and calling for the adventures of Rowan. The eccentric old man rubbed the back of his neck and pretended to be weary of their request. He reminded them that he had collected more stories than they could imagine. But the children refused to be distracted. They wanted this one, and no other. A small, knowing smile crossed his face. At last, he agreed, though he made them promise that, when they grew old, they would remember the tale and keep it alive for the next generation. Their cheers rang across the square. The bells on his cap jingled as he raised a fist to his mouth and cleared his throat. Then, with all the ceremony of a jester preparing a grand performance for a king, he began. 1 year ago, hero Rowan saved the world. The square fell silent. The children leaned closer, and even passing adults slowed their steps while pretending not to listen. Everyone knew the names woven into the tale. The Dawn Vanguard, the War of the Long Eclipse, and the Fractured God. For 10 long years, Rowan and his companions had pursued a victory almost no one believed possible. Their journey had demanded sacrifice beyond comprehension. Many brave souls had challenged the Fractured God before them, but courage alone had rarely kept anyone alive for long. The Dawn Vanguard, however, had endured. The storyteller explained that, at the end of that terrible journey, Rowan crossed beyond the vanished kingdom and entered the throne of reason. There, inside the Fractured God's own palace, surrounded by laughter, madness, and horrors that defied description, the hero faced his final enemy. The old man paused until every child was holding their breath. Then he clapped his hands, releasing a burst of confetti into the air, as he declared that after a battle fierce enough to shake the heavens, the hero had won. The children erupted in celebration. Their storyteller patiently waited for the noise to settle before continuing. According to the familiar version of the legend, the Fractured God was defeated, and everyone lived happily ever after. Yet the old man added that this was merely how he had heard the tale told, and an enemy as fond of tricks as the Fractured God was never so simple. A young girl with pigtails raised her hand and asked, "What became of the hero afterward?" The excitement in the square faded into an uncertain murmur. The storyteller answered with an amused cackle that echoed across the courtyard. That, he admitted, was the difficult part, because no one agreed on the truth. Some claimed Rowan eventually succumbed to the wounds he had suffered. Others believed he retired to a peaceful life in the countryside. There were stories that he wandered the world in secret, or that he had ascended into the heavens themselves. Then the old man lowered his voice and revealed the darkest rumor of all. Some people said the hero had gone completely mad. The children exchanged uneasy looks. When they demanded to know which story was true, the storyteller gazed toward the distant horizon. His expression became unreadable for a moment before its familiar whimsy returned. "If I told you that," he whispered, leaning forward as though sharing a forbidden secret, "the story would be over." The children groaned that it was unfair, but the old man only laughed. No tale worth hearing was entirely fair, he told them. A story was only as good as its ending, and anyone who searched for every answer in advance would spoil the adventure for themselves. With his suitcase in hand, he rose from the bench and bid farewell not only to the children, but also to the adults who had listened. With a faint light of hope in their eyes, it seemed that the young were not the only ones who still longed for a savior. As he prepared to leave Asterhold and seek new tales in another city, the storyteller murmured that the Fractured God might have been defeated, but the hero had vanished. Worse still, the age of peace everyone had prayed for had become something very different. That left one question, a question that troubled village chiefs, soldiers, merchants, and children alike. If the hero is gone, the old man wondered, who will save us now? He waited as though the square itself might answer. When none came, he gave a jovial laugh and disappeared into the crowd like a boat sinking beneath dark waves. Far away, thunder rolled. And deep within the darkness of a prison cell, the missing hero sat in chains. Cold water dripped steadily from a cracked ceiling. The dampness seeped into the stone and made the early morning chill even sharper. Rowan rose from his straw sleeping mat and stretched his aching back, working the stiffness from muscles that had found little comfort during the night. He folded his worn sheet, checked the tiny barred window that allowed only a few pale streaks of light into the cell, and began his usual exercises while waiting for the breakfast bell. "Maybe today's the day," he told himself. Rowan had repeated the same words every morning for almost a year. He imagined that one of the countless letters he had sent might finally be answered, and that someone would descend into this hole beneath the earth and lead him back into the light. He did not know who that person would be, but he chose to believe they existed. Halfway through a set of sit-ups, Rowan stopped and sat upright with his lean arms wrapped around his knees. The cuffs around his wrists suppressed his magic, though the invisible link between them still allowed him to move freely. He assured himself that someone would eventually recognize the mistake, come looking for him, and set him free. Then he could finally return to the life that had been stolen from him. Before he could finish the thought aloud, a woman's voice drifted from the neighboring cell. She warned him not to count on it. Unless he meant that today would be exactly as miserable as every other day, she saw no reason to share his optimism. A pair of sharp emerald eyes watched him through the bars. Her name was Nyra. Rowan had once overheard a careless guard use it. Such slips were rare, because prisoners in this place were normally addressed by what they were or by the number painted over their doors, never by who they had once been. Nyra appeared to be in her early 20s. Dirty blonde hair hung in a tangled frame around a face that seemed permanently unimpressed with the world. Instead of human ears, two small feathered winglets rose from either side of her head. Even in the same tattered prison rags as everyone else, she was unmistakably avian. She carried herself like a bird of prey held behind a cage door, always tense, always waiting for the smallest chance to take flight. During the months they had occupied neighboring cells, Nyra had made a habit of antagonizing guards and inmates alike. She also listened to Rowan's morning declarations just long enough to puncture them with a cynical remark. Usually, he accepted her mockery with patient good humor. That morning, however, it irritated him. Rowan asked why his hopes mattered to her and whether she wanted to escape as badly as he did. Nyra replied that wanting had nothing to do with reality. "Places like this," she said, "were where hope and elegant dreams came to die." Rowan dryly praised her optimism. She merely shrugged her feathered shoulders and advised him not to raise his expectations. Disappointment hurt less when a person expected nothing. Despite the cruelty of her words, Rowan found it difficult to blame her. A small young woman could not survive among hardened prisoners without developing a sharp edge, especially when the other inmates were anything but friendly. More troubling was the fact that she was not entirely wrong. Months had passed, yet Rowan understood no more about why he had been imprisoned than he did on the day he arrived. A fearful question rose in his mind. Had King Edric forgotten him? Before Rowan could dwell on it, metal boots struck the corridor floor in a hard, measured rhythm. A baton hammered against each iron door in succession, shattering the morning silence. That was the prison's version of a breakfast bell. Tired groans answered from cells filled with inmates who did not share Rowan's habit of waking early. He was already standing when the warden entered the block and barked the familiar instructions. Every prisoner was to remain back while the cells were unlocked, then form an orderly line according to cell number. Anyone who disobeyed would not eat. Rowan immediately answered, "Sir, yes, sir." Nyra said nothing. The warden marched to the far end of the block and stopped outside Rowan's cell, though his attention was fixed on the one across from it. A cruel smile appeared beneath the deep slash that ran from his forehead to the bridge of his nose. He announced that the bird would not be eating that day either. The gruff man walked away chuckling. Only after he had passed did Nyra step nearer to the bars. Taloned toes showed beneath her prison trousers and tapped impatiently against the stone. Her cell had no window of its own. The only light inside came from the weak beams spilling across the corridor from Rowan's. Their eyes met. Nyra wore the same indifferent expression as always, while Rowan could offer only an apologetic smile before a guard shoved him into motion. With the warden watching from the doorway, There was nothing he could do for her. The inmates were herded up the stairs toward the mess hall like sheep from Rowan's family farm. Guards lined the route, with hands close to the swords at their hips, prepared for any prisoner foolish enough to attempt an escape. Rowan had no such plan. However desperately he wanted freedom, he remained convinced that his imprisonment had resulted from some terrible error. He understood that many criminals claimed innocence. What made his own situation unbearable was that he could remember nothing that justified a sentence this long or conditions this harsh. In his memory, he had been walking through the halls of the Crown Lyceum. Then, almost as if he had fallen asleep for a single instant, he had awakened in chains. It made no sense. Lost in thought, Rowan slowed. A guard shouted for prisoner 32 to keep moving and drove the hilt of a sword into his ribs. The blow forced the air from his lungs and sent saliva from his mouth. Rowan stumbled, but continued forward. His eyes twitched with pain. Yet he did not look back. He had learned that protest only created more bruises. The dining hall was scarcely large enough for all 32 inmates, and on that morning, only 31 were permitted to attend. Prisoners of different races crowded onto too few benches. Humans gravitated toward humans, beastfolk toward their own kind, and everyone else claimed whatever space remained. Rowan felt no kinship with any of them, least of all the two cutthroats who had devoted themselves to tormenting him from the day he arrived. Two cutthroats had claimed Rowan as their favorite target from the moment he entered the prison. That morning, as he sat on a rickety bench, one of them tipped his bowl and poured the hot stew down the back of Rowan's neck instead of letting him eat it. The pair laughed that the spill had been an accident, then seized what remained and divided it between themselves. One slapped Rowan on the shoulder as if they were old friends. No prisoner objected, no guard intervened, and Rowan's expression barely changed. The heavier bully, Bran, asked how long Rowan had been imprisoned. 8 months, perhaps. Maybe an entire year. His lanky companion, Corvin, said the number did not matter. None of them were ever leaving. He mocked Rowan for speaking so often about a king, and leaned close enough for the smell of his rotting breath to fill Rowan's nose. "You think you're special. 32, Corvin sneered. "But you're nothing." Rowan refused to give them the reaction they wanted. He wiped stew from his collar and dark blue hair, then remained silent until the pair lost interest and moved on in search of another victim. When the end of breakfast was announced, Rowan returned to the line. His meal had been stolen, but he had not left the hall entirely empty-handed. He returned quietly to his cell at the end of the block, waiting until he was sure nobody could see him. From his pocket, he produced a bread roll and sat down, crisscrossed, to enjoy what remained of his meal. As he lifted the roll to his mouth, however, he spotted Nyra's silhouette in the corner of her cell. Her chin was resting on her knees, sitting on her bed of straw as if it were her nest. She craned her neck slightly at Rowan's approach, but just as quickly went back to looking at the wall. A loud grumble echoed between them. Whose stomach produced it, Rowan didn't quite know. However, he took one last look at his breakfast and quickly tore it in half. Nyra reacted to a noise, looking back again to see half of a loaf, rolling until it hit the iron bars of her cell. She raised an eyebrow, unsure. "You haven't eaten. Neither have you." Rowan's reply was swift. "And how did you know I haven't eaten yet?" "The smell of gruel's coming from your clothes instead of your mouth," Nyra replied curtly before looking away. "And it was a hunch." She had him there, he had to admit. "Anyways, I'm not after your charity, buddy. Keep it." "It isn't charity." Rowan let out a small sigh and smiled. "I'm just sharing a meal with a friend." "Friend?" Nyra's lips parted slightly, whispering inaudibly to herself. She finally grabbed the roll. "Idiot." Nyra took an exaggerated bite of the stale bread. Rowan couldn't see her face anymore, but he got the feeling his prison neighbor wasn't as annoyed as she wanted him to believe. And for the first time that morning, the stone against Rowan's back didn't seem quite so cold. Though his ribs still hurt a bit from before, in time, Nyra finally spoke up again, her sharp gaze crossing his. "Don't make a habit of it. Of sharing my lunch? No, of being so nice?" Nyra replied quietly, looking down at her hands. "You shouldn't. Like with those two bullies, people will walk all over you if you let them. It's Better to be feared. Take it from me. She mumbled that last bit. Rowan thought for a moment about how to respond appropriately, though eventually just one statement came through. I'll try to keep that in mind. By midday, the sun had climbed high enough to warm the narrow cell block and carry the scent of fresh grass through Rowan's small window. Prisoners were granted only 2 periods outside their cells each day. The first was breakfast, the second was yard time. The warden returned to announce it at full volume, ordering the inmates to wash before coming back because they smelled like horse dung. To Rowan's astonishment, Nyra snapped to attention and shouted, "Sir, yes, sir." The warden stopped in disbelief and demanded to know who had answered. Nyra proudly identified herself. He stared at her as though the fractured god himself had spoken through the bars. After several days without food, he wondered aloud, had she finally decided to become a model prisoner? Nyra repeated her enthusiastic obedience. The warden asked whether she now intended to follow the straight and narrow, comparing that path to the crooked hind end of a sea serpent. Nyra answered exactly as before. For several long seconds, the man simply studied her. Then a booming laugh rose from his belly, and he slapped his knee. Rowan and the guards exchanged bewildered looks. At last, the warden allowed prisoner 31 to join the others, though he warned that the slightest trouble would send her back to solitary confinement. This time, Nyra's "sir, yes, sir," carried considerably less enthusiasm. As she slipped into line, several inmates snickered at the rare sight of the harpy flattering the warden. Before disappearing from the block, Nyra glanced toward Rowan and gave what appeared to be a quick wink. Rowan decided he must have imagined it. The warden then asked whether prisoner 32 intended to come outside. Rowan looked toward the sunlight shining through his window. Birdsong mingled with the distant shouts of inmates already in the yard, and the promise of fresh air was tempting. Then his gaze returned to the dusty book beside his bedding. Rowan told the warden he would rather remain in his cell. The man grunted, called him a pansy under his breath, and left with the others. Once Rowan was certain the block was empty, he opened the old textbook and turned to its first page. To the guards, it was nothing more than a discarded volume from the Crown Lyceum, too unimportant to confiscate. They did not know it was the first book Rowan had ever truly owned. His thumb passed over the faded inscription, "To Rowan, knowledge is the one weapon they can't take from you." Edric. From the day Rowan first arrived in the capital, Archmage King Edric had insisted that education would change his life. Rowan remembered 2 years of evenings spent beside candlelight, struggling through letters, words, and ideas that had once seemed impossible. Once he could read and communicate properly, he had been meant to train as a knight, learning both weapons and magic. He never received the chance. Before those lessons could begin, he had awakened in prison without explanation. Even so, Rowan felt a debt to the royal family that he could never repay. Edric had lifted Rowan, his mother, and his sister from poverty. That gratitude was one more reason he could not remain imprisoned forever. While Rowan read, Nyra entered the yard with her hands folded behind her head. She told herself that if the idiot wanted to waste all of his recreation time with a book, it was none of her concern. In truth, she had little interest in recreation either. Ignoring the hostile stares of the guards, Nyra crossed the yard at an even pace. Her emerald eyes soon found Bran and Corvin near the far wall, laughing more loudly than anyone else. A sharp grin revealed her true purpose. Nyra had a debt of her own to collect. Bran noticed her before she crossed half the yard. He and Corvin could not tell why she approached with such an indifferent stride, but they knew she was the only woman kept in their hardened block and that her temper made her difficult prey. They preferred victims who did not fight back. Still, boredom made them careless. Bran was still grinning from ear to ear below. He smacked at a bug on his neck, bending down as if to meet Nyra's diminutive gaze. "What's that, birdie? Cat got your—" Everyone in the yard turned at the crack that followed. Nyra's fist had already buried itself in Bran's face, flattening his nose in a spray of blood before anyone realized she'd thrown the punch. Nyra lowered her fist without so much as changing her expression. "You bitch." The same could not be said of the lanky cutthroat, who became instantly enraged. "Don't think you'll get away with what?" One moment, hatred burned in his eyes. The next, he was flat on his back, staring at the clouds above them. "Gack!" Her taloned foot stomped on his chest with enough force to rattle his ribs and every rotten organ inside. The hell was that for? Bran finally stood up, trying to stop his bleeding nose. Nyra removed her foot from the beanpole, grabbing his much heftier friend by his blood-stained shirt and raising her fist again. Panic finally gripped him when he saw her sharp gaze up close. Hey, now wait a minute. I was just... You picked on the nicest idiot in this dump. Nyra punched him again, hard, as he braced. Well? Another punch landed with a thud, blood spattering onto the dirt. Bran coughed a fit. Congratulations. Nyra's emerald eyes bored into Bran's as she leaned in close, bringing him back down to her level. You've got me instead. Even subdued by her anti-magic cuffs, she didn't need to bring the power of wind to bear against her foes. Bran tried to create some distance between the two of them, his hands shaking, but to no avail. His friend also tried and failed to crawl away. The warden's whistle pierced the air. Hey, that's enough! Break it up, you three! At the warden's call, the guards dove in, dogpiling the three troublemakers in seconds, bringing relief to at least two of them. For fear of the crossbowmen, that was usually the signal to disengage, but the harpy wanted to get her money's worth, and she certainly did. The shrill whistle pulled Rowan's attention away from his book for only a moment. He briefly wondered what was happening in the yard, then dismissed the thought and turned another page. It wasn't long before the familiar clatter of boots echoed through the corridor once more. The afternoon recreation period had ended, and the inmates filed back into their cells one by one. Nyra arrived last, escorted by two much taller guards. The warden shoved her through the doorway hard enough to make her stumble. Hope it was worth it. Nyra regained her footing before plopping down onto her straw mat, gingerly nursing her tail feathers. It was. At the return of his neighbor, Rowan snapped his book closed. His eyes spotted the split in her lip first. Next came her bloody knuckles and the swollen cheek she rubbed tenderly. Truth be told, though, she looked a mess all over. Nyra. Rowan scanned her through the bars. What the heck happened to you out there? She didn't say a word at first. Finally, though, she turned to Rowan with a muted reply. Nothing. Rowan didn't want to press the issue, and Nyra certainly wasn't the type to engage in needless conversation. However, Rowan made one key observation after noticing the absence of a certain pair of obnoxious voices. Where are Bran and his friend? The infirmary. Nyra didn't pause this time to answer. Rowan blinked. Oh? Silence settled over the corridor once more. Was it because of breakfast? A faint smile tugged at the corner of Nyra's battered lip. You're an idiot. Nyra turned over to rest. But not a complete one, I suppose. Rowan stifled a laugh. Right on the money. He didn't know how to feel, watching someone go all out for his sake, and over such a small thing as a meal shared between the two. But he wasn't so dense as to not see the sentiment behind such an act. Thank you, Nyra. Rowan. Bran spat blood on the infirmary floor, wiping away some dribble from his chin with a sleeve. The two cutthroats were feeling sore, in more ways than one, and their pride had taken quite the beating as well. If the guards hadn't jumped in, I'd have folded that little bird in half. Ah, shut up, Corvin. Bran winced as the healer shoved another ball of gauze up his nostril, giving his voice a nasally tinge. You got flattened even worse than I did. Corvin scowled, clawing for an excuse. It was a cheap shot, I tell ya. Won't happen again. Sure, it won't. Right then, I'm going to go file a report. You boys get some rest, and don't even think about trying to escape. The healer stood up, having performed his bare minimum duties. You'll be full of arrows before you make it to the end of the yard. In any case, with a distrustful look, the healer left the two men unattended. Any wise ideas about escape had been thoroughly beaten out of them long before then, but a guard was regularly posted at the end of the hall, just in case. Some healer he is. Corvin shifted on his cot, nursing his aching chest. Before Bran could echo his complaints, muffled voices drifted through the stone wall beside them from the room adjoining theirs. The warden's office. A visitor from the capital? That's a rare sight. The warden tented his hands together. What brings you all the way out here to my humble establishment? We've come regarding one of your prisoners, another man said in a calm voice. He was entrusted to you about a year ago, along with a sizable sum from the castle treasury for your cooperation. 32? Correct. At the mention of their favorite bullying target, Bran and Corvin suddenly took an interest in the conversation, pressing their ears to the wall and bickering quietly over one sitting too close to the other. The messenger continued. Has there been any change in his condition? He's still the same pansy you dropped on my doorstep, if that's what you're asking, the warden replied. Quiet, reads all day. Honestly, I have quite a time believing the half-baked stories you people told me about the guy. That is because you were never meant to know the full truth of the matter. Well, the warden couldn't take that answer at face value. If I'm expected to babysit him, I ought to know who I've got locked in my prison. His tone was resolute, and there was an air of silence between the two men which lasted for a handful of moments. Just as the two cutthroats began to lose interest in eavesdropping, the messenger from the capital relented with a shocking bit of information. Very well. If he's to remain here, you should know what you're up against. Should he find his will to resist? The gentleman continued, briefly hesitating. In truth, the man known here as Prisoner 32 is actually Hero Rowan Halcrest. The warden said nothing as he left his office, his face white as a sheet. He went off to distract himself with some other duty, and the messenger went on his merry way, leaving the remote prison behind on horseback. The two eavesdroppers heard all of it. Bran slowly looked at Corvin, and the underfed fellow looked right back. Terrified, they rang out in unison. We dumped stew on Rowan Halcrest. We picked fights with the damn hero of Asterhold. The two men weren't the brightest by any metric, but their instinct for self-preservation lived where it did in anyone else, right beside their ability to want. We are so dead. Corvin swallowed hard, praying to whatever god came to mind first for mercy. Staring toward the prison block, Bran grappled with a thought of his own. Soon, however, the terror on his face gave way to a strange smile as the gears churned in his otherwise empty head. There was a twinkle in his eye, the realization of an opportunity. Not if we play this right, my friend. Not if we play this right. The next morning's breakfast period arrived, and for the first time in several days, Nyra took her place beside Rowan in the line. It was also the first morning they'd stood together as friends. At least, Rowan had come to believe they were. What is it? Nyra caught Rowan staring at her as they were marched up to the cafeteria, raising a questioning eyebrow. Nothing much. Rowan waved it off, scratching his cheek. I was just thinking, we've been line neighbors for so long now. It's weird that we can chat like this. Nyra gave Rowan the same flat look she always did, but then her expression softened a bit. It's only natural, she said, turning her head forward. It would be weirder if we didn't act like we knew each other, right? Rowan silently admitted that she had a point. Right. Rowan nodded with a smile. They sat down with their bowls of the day's stew. Chunks of lamb swimming in a sour-smelling gravy, the chef's choice. Nyra sat beside Rowan as if it were the natural thing to do, making it the first breakfast he'd shared with anyone in nearly a year. Rowan tried to remember the last time he had shared breakfast with anyone. A fiery-haired friend who had never left him alone came to mind, followed by King Edric's young son, Cassian. The prince had been like a second sibling to Rowan, nearly as dear as his own sister. Once he was free, Rowan looked forward to seeing them again. Nyra's spoon hovered to her mouth before suddenly stopping. She wasn't nearly finished with her meal, but she wore a wary look that grabbed Rowan's attention immediately. That's when he noticed the first pair of eyes on him, then another, and more. Soon, they were all on him. All except his usual bullies, who didn't so much as glance in his direction. Rowan smiled awkwardly to diffuse some tension, but nobody in the dining hall returned his gesture. In fact, a prisoner he'd never interacted with before cautiously approached their end of the table, pushed forward by a much larger and more intimidating fellow. Nyra narrowed her gaze at him. Hey, 32. So the guys have been wondering something, the prisoner stammered. Is it true? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow. Rowan put down his own spoon, tilting his head in confusion. Is what true? That you're the guy? A hushed silence fell over the entire room. Not a single inmate so much as chewed on a bite of food. Something was wrong. Are you, by chance, Rowan Halcrest? A smile spread across his face. You wanted to know my name. Relief softened Rowan's expression. He assumed they merely wanted to know his name. Wait, don't? Nyra reached for Rowan's mouth, already realizing where this was going. I am. Rowan continued smiling. Why? For a heartbeat, nobody moved a muscle. Then? The benches all scraped backward at nearly the same time. Someone dropped their bowl, spilling the contents on the floor. Finally, someone pointed a finger right at Rowan. It's the hero of Asterhold, Rowan blinked. Me? The dining hall exploded into shouting. No one could seem to agree on what to do next, but all the overlapping voices reacted to Rowan's honest reply. Grab him. The Dawn Vanguard put my brother in prison. Protect him. He's our ticket out of here. I don't believe a damn word he says. Nyra pushed Rowan down just as a wooden stool came, screaming across the room, shattering against the wall behind them. This, of course, was the first spark in a massive brawl between prisoners who couldn't even agree on why they were fighting. The cooks hurriedly escaped before they could get caught in the crossfire, deciding that breaking up fights was a cut above their job descriptions and pay grades. Besides, you happy now? You've worked these lunatics up into a frenzy, Nyra shouted over the noise, both their heads still bent low. I thought reading all those books made you smarter. How? I just don't understand. I only told them my name. Never mind the name. Can't you read a room? Well, actually, what's going on in here? The guards burst in, scanning the chaotic scene before them in disbelief. All prisoners, back to their cells immediately. That's a direct order. We don't take orders from nobody no more, Bran proclaimed from the middle of the scrum, his buddy Corvin rapidly nodding his head. We're busting out of here, and 32 know hero Rowan Halcrest is gonna help us. Rowan stared at them, unable to understand how he had become the leader of a riot he had never planned. You heard him. He's one of us, Corvin echoed his portly friend. Heroes don't abandon people. Those conniving bastards, Nyra suddenly thought to herself with a scowl, as it became abundantly clear how all this had started. Cheers rang out. Meanwhile, at the two cutthroats' proclamation, it seemed more inmates were getting on board with the idea of escape, personal gripes aside. Common criminals united behind a single purpose, swept away by the promise of freedom. It might have warmed the heart, had their supposed inspiration been even remotely aware of it himself. His gaze darted between the prisoners awaiting his leadership and the guards who had taken Bran's claim as proof that Rowan was the conspirator. One of the guards furrowed his brow. Rowan Halcrest? He looked toward one of his companions, who answered with nothing more than a confused shrug. No, that's preposterous. Rather than trying to make sense of the prisoner's tall tales, frustration won out in the end. Seize 32. He's inciting a prison riot. Rowan waved his arms, trying, but not quite getting the chance to clear up the misunderstanding he'd somehow caused. No, I'm really not. No time. Nyra grabbed Rowan's hand, yanking him past the guards as they lunged at them. Before the armored men could react further, the prisoners all made their push at once, ganging up on them with superior numbers. One guard disappeared under a pile of desperate inmates, another getting his helmet knocked off by a beastman twice his size. I've got the keys! Free the other blocks, the women's too, then burn this place to the ground. Whatever happened next, there would be no returning to prison life as normal, but there was no time to second-guess themselves. Those who weren't already preoccupied rushed after Rowan and Nyra into the hallway. Nyra, what are you doing? Rowan stumbled, trying to match her pace. What's it look like I'm doing? She replied over her shoulder. I'm getting you out of here. For a moment, Rowan wondered whether they should be stopping the riot rather than escaping it. Moral conflict tightened his expression. The situation had spiraled out of control, and someone was bound to be seriously hurt, if they had not been already. A shrill bell suddenly echoed throughout the prison, bringing that thought to a swift close. The perimeter alarm. Elsewhere, one of the guards gasped. Seal every exit! Footfalls thundered through the corridor ahead, heavy boots of no less than a dozen men by Nyra's closest estimate. Great! She clicked her tongue, slowing to an abrupt stop. There! Cut them off! A squad of guards rounded the corner, their short swords and shields at the ready. Their formation left few openings for anyone to squeeze through. The wave of prisoners behind Rowan and Nyra continued forward, giving Nyra a desperate idea. We'll cut through here. She seized Rowan's hand and pulled him into an adjoining passage leading past the infirmary and the warden's office. A secondary door at the far end, she explained, opened into the yard. Behind them, the prisoners crashed into the shield wall. Some forced gaps in the formation, while others cried out as the guards drove them back. "You're sure this is the way?" Rowan asked as he struggled to match her pace. Nyra nodded without slowing. "And the others?" "They made their choice," she replied, though a brief hesitation roughened her voice. "They'll buy us time." Rowan heard the conflict beneath her cold answer, but there was no time to challenge it. Nyra released his hand as they reached the final corridor, and both of them sprinted toward the outside door without checking what waited beyond it. That mistake nearly killed her. A young guard stood near the exit, as surprised to see the fugitives as they were to find him. He had likely spent most of his service avoiding work, but with his pride, employment, and perhaps his life suddenly at risk, he acted without thought. He raised a blackened axe over Nyra's head. Nyra instantly understood that desperation had made her careless. There should always have been a guard near the secondary exit. The axe descended. For once, Nyra's attachment to another person overpowered the instinct that had always told her to survive at any cost. She hoped Rowan would run past without looking back. In the suspended moment, between life and death, she accepted that possibility. Rowan moved first. Although Nyra had been several steps ahead, he crossed the distance before even he understood what his body was doing. He slipped between her and the falling blade, twisted the axe from the guard's hands, and drove the man to the floor with one open-handed shove. The movement should not have been possible. Now disarmed, the terrified guard scrambled upright and fled without waiting to discover how Rowan might use the weapon against him. Rowan stood holding an ornate great axe of black steel. A purple jewel rested at its center. The moment his hands closed around the haft, pain pressed into his skull for reasons he could not understand. At the same time, the weapon felt strangely correct. Rowan had never trained with an axe, yet it rested in his grip as though it belonged there. Nyra stared at him and asked how he had moved so quickly. Rowan admitted that he did not know. His first concern was whether she had been hurt. She told him to ask again after they escaped and urged him onward. They passed through the unguarded door into a grassy space between the prison buildings. Sunlight warmed Rowan's skin for the first time in what felt like an age. The relief lasted only until they reached the yard. An entire formation of guards stood between them and the great wooden gate that served as the compound's only exit. The warden waited at the front with his rapier pointed toward the fugitives. He calmly told them they had gone far enough. Nyra cursed when she realized none of the other prisoners had reached the yard. When Rowan asked what that meant, she gave him the obvious answer. They were alone. The warden raised his free hand. At least 24 crossbowmen appeared along the walls and in both watchtowers. In practiced unison, they aimed at the patch of grass where Rowan and Nyra stood. The warden admitted that he was impressed. Reaching the yard past so many guards with only 2 people should have required someone as powerful as a god-cursed legend. Then he noticed the axe in Rowan's hand. The messenger's warning returned to him. If the prisoner ever found the will to resist, the warden should understand what he was facing. Fear entered the old soldier's body before he could hide it. Nyra saw the change. A lifetime among liars and criminals had taught her to read tension in shoulders, hands, and eyes. The warden might have concealed his panic from his own men, but not from her. He was afraid of Rowan. The warden eased his posture unexpectedly, lowering his weapon down below his hip. "I'm going to give you 2 one last chance to turn your asses around and walk right back into those cells of yours." The warden's thick brows twitched ever so slightly. "Now, I won't lie to you. Things won't be as free around here as they were before, but you'll be alive, and that's got to count for something, right?" The guards behind the warden muttered in protest, but a sharp glance quickly shut them up. "And of course, we'll have to separate the 2 of you into different blocks." "No." Nyra turned in shock. Rowan's confused expression grew firm, hardening into resolve for maybe the first time since she'd known him. The warden raised an eyebrow. "What did you just say, 32? I said. "No." Rowan stepped closer, causing the warden to twitch backward a step, the crossbowmen all ready to fire, but he waved them off. Things weren't going to be so easy for anyone if they fired on the prisoner that was left specially in his care. "For a year, I've done everything I was supposed to. Rowan, meanwhile, continued. I waited for someone to come get me out. I was patient, but I've realized something important. And what is that? The warden humored him. He had to approach this carefully if he wanted to keep his head. That I'm done being patient, Rowan said resolutely, putting his axe forward. And I won't let you take away my only friend in this place. It's not right. I don't care what you say. Rowan? Nyra stared. I hear ya, just put the axe down, son. I won't. Rowan waved his free arm. I'm done letting people risk themselves because of me. I'll die before I ever do that again. Despite his best efforts, the warden came to realize something on his own. He searched Rowan's face for the frightened prisoner he'd grown used to, but he was no longer there. The warden's expression fell because, despite his newfound respect for Rowan, a decision had been forced as a result of the man finding his spine. Damn it! He sighed and closed his eyes. The situation could afford no more wasted time. Archers! He opened his eyes again. Prepare to fire at the prisoners! All the crossbows rose in perfect unison. Rowan instinctively stepped in front of Nyra. Despite having no idea how he intended to stop a rain of arrows by himself, a bead of sweat rolled down his brow, falling to the grass. Nyra's eyes darted between the walls, the watchtowers. And finally, the axe in Rowan's hands. Put the axe down. Nyra's eyes lit up with an idea. The axe. We just need a little. Before she could finish the thought, the western watchtower suddenly exploded into flames. Wood, stone, and two unfortunate archers became fodder as they rained into the courtyard below. It was just the distraction they needed. What in the hell? The warden nearly fell backward. He barked out an order. Magic, look alive! Now! Nyra shouted, pointing at her wrists. My cuffs! From behind them, dozens of prisoners came pouring out of the main entrance into the yard. Men, women, humans, beastmen, and everyone who had a desire to see the outside. Many were no longer wearing their anti-magic restraints either. Rowan brought the axe down against the glowing link between Nyra's cuffs. The chain shattered at once. Both bands dissolved into motes of white light and drifted away. Wind gathered around Nyra. It lifted her tangled hair, spread the pale feathers at her shoulders, and drew dust into a tightening spiral around her feet. Rowan watched in amazement as her magic returned. Nyra rubbed her wrists and smiled. This, she said. I've missed. Rowan blinked. Nyra vanished. The boom of displaced air reached him only after she was gone. A white blur raced up the wall and then moved along its surface faster than the archers could turn. Guards shouted that the harpy had breached the defenses. Their cries ended in alarm as Nyra knocked them from the wall one after another. Bolts filled the air, but every shot buried itself in wood, dirt, or empty grass. From the top of the wall, Nyra planted her hands on her hips and announced that no one could shoot what they could not catch. She told Rowan to leave the archers to the escaping prisoners. The warden was his responsibility. Rowan looked from Nyra to the defeated guards around her, then toward the old soldier waiting in front of him. He still had no idea how he was supposed to win. The warden stood as firmly as an ancient oak, apparently untouched by the chaos surrounding him. His eyes remained fixed on Rowan, as though every other person in the compound had ceased to exist. Rowan knew that if hatred alone could kill, he would already be dead. He stepped forward, and the warden matched him with rapier in hand. The great axe still felt unfamiliar. Yet Rowan's fingers naturally found the grooves along its metal haft whenever his grip tightened. The weapon was large enough that most men would have needed both hands simply to hold it upright, but in Rowan's grasp it felt almost weightless. The warden had fought since his youth. He had been barely old enough to grow a beard when he was conscripted. Against the fractured god's forces on the western frontier. There, he had watched soldiers laugh until their throats bled and turn their weapons on their closest friends. Now he faced a different kind of terror. The legend before him was said to be more weapon than man, an impossible creature pulled from a storybook. Among all the guards still standing, the warden was the only one skilled enough to delay Rowan's advance toward the gate. Smoke rose behind the hero. The surrounding battle faded into a high ringing in the warden's ears. He inhaled deeply, as he had countless times before a charge, and brought himself fully into the moment. Something about Rowan's posture disturbed him. The young man held almost no guard. At first, the warden wondered whether the hero was so confident that he considered defense unnecessary. Near the end of the war, rumors had described Rowan Halcrest as an inhuman killer without mercy or understanding. Yet the prisoner before him looked less like a monster and more like a frightened boy awaiting punishment from a stern father. The warden searched for a trap in Rowan's careless stance and found none. That absence frightened and angered him more than a battle cry would have. Rowan felt the danger in the air change as the warden tightened his grip. He had no experience with which to predict the first strike. But Nyra had trusted him. He could not run. His only hope was to react quickly enough and adjust. As the fight unfolded, the warden continued questioning the impossible contrast. Was this truly the man who had crossed the vanished kingdom and slain the fractured god? He remembered Rowan's arrival at the prison. The prisoner had been confused, rambling, and apparently detached from reality. At the time, the warden assumed madness explained the difference between the legend and the man. Then another possibility occurred to him. Perhaps those responsible for Rowan's imprisonment had taken more than his freedom. The warden broke the silence and demanded an honest answer. He asked whether Rowan remembered the War of the Long Eclipse. Rowan said everyone remembered it. The warden then asked whether he had fought in that war. Rowan answered no. He had been preparing to train as a knight, he explained. King Edric had been guiding him. And Rowan believed both the king and his family were still waiting for his return. That was why he had to escape. The warden felt his stomach drop. He closed his eyes and asked one final question. Do you know who you really are? Rowan had heard similar questions too many times. He almost laughed until he saw the pain in the warden's expression. I'm Rowan Halcrest, he answered. Isn't that enough? For the warden, it was not. He quietly asked Rowan's forgiveness. The rapier moved before Rowan saw it. A line of blood opened across his shoulder. Only a reflex he did not understand kept the blade from entering his throat. The warden struck again from the side. Rowan's axe swung on its own, catching the rapier and throwing sparks into the smoky air. Rowan's heart raced faster than his thoughts. He did not understand what answer had provoked the attack or why his name changed people's behavior, but the duel had become a fight for survival. A kick drove into his stomach and sent him rolling backward. The warden charged after him with a roar. Rowan had watched the Crown Wardens practice from the Lyceum dormitory. He knew how years of training shaped a proper stance, block, and strike. What he could not explain was why his body moved as though it had already endured those years. Every exchange should have ended his life. Instead, Rowan stumbled from one instinctive defense to the next. The warden, despite all his experience, gradually found himself losing ground. Blood ran down Rowan's arm. Adrenaline dulled the pain, but it could not replace a healer. Rowan knew a few simple restorative spells, yet the anti-magic cuffs still prevented him from using them. Another explosion shook the yard. The prison door beyond the warden shattered, and a flood of inmates surged through, chanting for freedom. They flowed around the two fighters like water dividing around a stone. Neither man looked away. Again and again, the great axe met the warden's steel. Chips flew from the rapier. The old soldier could not understand how Rowan remained so powerful after everything that had been taken from him. Rowan, meanwhile, felt his fear recede. Each block, wound, and swing gave shape to a resolve that had been absent for a year. Somewhere within the rhythm of battle, his hesitation began to fall away. The purple jewel in the axe seemed to flash. Rowan's movements grew faster. The warden found them increasingly difficult to stop. Without meaning to, the old man laughed. Part of him had expected an execution. Instead, Rowan had given him a true duel, and the veteran in him welcomed the struggle even as his aging body protested. An old injury from the Western Front seized his shoulder at the worst possible moment. The warden faltered. Rowan did not. One final blow from the axe struck the rapier. Its tip broke away, spun across the yard, and buried itself in the earth. The warden dropped to his knees. Rowan stood over him with the axe raised, his expression dark and unreadable. The defeated man closed his eyes and told him to finish it. Rowan could not. Whatever killing instinct had driven his body vanished as suddenly as it appeared. He felt relief, pain, and confusion, but no hatred for the old soldier. That act of mercy forced the warden to reconsider everything he had believed about hero Rowan Halcrest. Perhaps the man before him was not the monster from the rumors after all. Nyra landed beside Rowan and brushed dust from herself. She looked from him to the kneeling warden with obvious admiration, though there was no time for praise. The gate stood open, and she urged Rowan to leave. He lowered the axe and followed. The warden watched them go. A dagger remained hidden inside his coat. He could have drawn it, lunged at Rowan's back, and turned the young man's mercy against him. He could have ended the legend. His hand stayed still. The same hand that had never hesitated during the war remained at his side while the most confusing man he had ever met disappeared through the gate. Only after Rowan and Nyra were gone did the warden draw the dagger and rise. Bodies from both sides lay across the courtyard. Smoke rolled between the buildings, while flames consumed the empty prison entrusted to his command. A wounded lieutenant emerged from the haze and apologized. There had been too many prisoners, he said, and he had failed. The warden placed a hand on the man's armored shoulder and corrected him. They had failed together. A force of nature might now be loose in the world, and the people who had hidden Rowan would not forgive that mistake. The warden asked the lieutenant for one final service. The younger man immediately agreed to anything. Then he noticed the dagger. The warden asked him to serve as his second. After a heavy silence, the lieutenant accepted. Beyond the prison, Rowan and Nyra followed a dirt path through the forest. Crows rose from the trees as Rowan looked back at the smoking compound in the distance. Burned timber mixed with the damp scent of the woods. Sunlight leaked through the branches, and freedom felt warmer than Rowan remembered, though the insects made it considerably itchier. They moved quickly to create as much distance as possible before reinforcements arrived. Nyra walked beside Rowan with her hands behind her head and praised his fight. From the watchtower, she had seen everything. In her opinion, the old warden could barely keep up. Rowan returned the compliment. Nyra had moved so quickly that even his eyes could not follow her. With obvious pride, she declared that no one could catch Nyra. Rowan immediately asked how she had been imprisoned. Nyra shoved him playfully and insisted that the circumstances had been different. His laughter pulled at the wound in his shoulder, and pain escaped between his teeth. Nyra noticed the tear in his prison uniform and asked whether he was all right. Rowan flexed his arm. The wound had already closed by itself, though he intended to find a healer before it became infected. He also needed someone to remove the cuffs, still suppressing his magic. Nyra studied him with suspicion and said he had a very strange body. Rowan could not disagree. The impossible healing was only part of it. Nyra also pointed to the way he had fought and asked whether he truly had no idea what he was. Rowan laughed uneasily. He was beginning to suspect that everyone knew something about him that he did not. Even so, he was not foolish enough to deny that the duel had revealed something deeply unnatural. The fact that he had survived was proof enough. Nyra dismissed the questions surrounding Rowan's identity with a wave. Whatever the rest of the world believed, she said, he was simply her friend. She warned him not to let rumors of heroism make him arrogant. Rowan's face brightened. Looking directly into her eyes, he said he was glad they had become friends. Nyra crossed her arms and told him not to make the moment strange. His sincerity always caught her off guard. More importantly, they needed to decide what came next before sunset. They had, after all, just escaped a high-security prison. They continued along the forest road until Nyra's steps gradually slowed and stopped. Rowan turned and asked whether she was all right. She forced a brittle smile and repeated that they had broken out of prison, laughing in a way that sounded increasingly unstable. Rowan agreed, still failing to understand the problem. Then Nyra reminded him why she had been imprisoned. One purse. She had stolen a single purse, nearly completed her sentence, and now the escape had transformed her into a wanted fugitive. Panic overtook her. Nyra paced across the road, bit her nails, and shouted her frustration toward the sky. Rowan tried to comfort her by pointing out that they were both wanted. The attempt only earned him an incredulous stare. Nyra began rapidly considering escape routes. Perhaps they could leave the kingdom and hide in Erwin. Then she remembered that the Rainbow Bridge would be watched for stowaways. A ship to Silvarin might be possible, but the ports would be even worse. If bounty hunters already knew their faces, they might not reach any transport at all. Rowan repeatedly tried to interrupt until he finally shouted her name. When Nyra demanded to know what he wanted, Rowan said he had a better plan. Running now would condemn them to run forever. He would never clear their names and might never see his family again. That was a future he refused to accept. Nyra, desperate enough to listen, asked what miracle could possibly restore an ordinary life in the kingdom of Elaris. Rowan proposed going directly to Asterhold. The suggestion sounded to Nyra like volunteering to be filled with arrows at the capital gate. Rowan understood the danger but asked her to trust him. The king would know why he had been imprisoned. Once the mistake was explained, their names could be cleared, and both of them could return to their lives. Nyra privately wondered what life waited for her, but a more immediate flaw remained. She believed Rowan was still clinging to fantasies about royal favor, now that he no longer needed them to survive prison. Rowan insisted that he was telling the truth. He suddenly remembered the book and reached for his waistband, then searched every pocket and fold of his prison clothes. It was gone. The book had been his only possession from the life he remembered. In the confusion of the escape, he must have left it in his cell. His shoulders dropped. Nyra had never seen him look so defeated. The way he stared at the empty place where the book should have rested finally showed her how much it meant to him. Listen. She scratched at the back of her scalp. I don't really know what's going on in that mind of yours, to be frank. Rowan looked up. And I think this whole king business still sounds completely insane, no sugarcoating it. But, Nyra sighed, finally composed. I can tell it matters a lot to you. And if the man who saved my life says that he's got some half-cocked plan to get us out of this mess, well, I guess I can at least hear him out. Nyra. The light returned to Rowan's eyes. A sweet idiot like you is going to need a hand, though, if you're going to make it there in one piece. Nyra smirked a little. So let's say for 1 second that you're telling the truth. What exactly do you think happens when we walk into Asterhold? He was like a father to me. He taught me how to read. Gave my mother, sister, and me a better life. And all I ever did was chase off a bandit or two that attacked his carriage. Rowan shook his head. Even so, Edric, he told me I could be somebody. Nyra's expression lost all of its color. If anyone can explain why I woke up in prison, how I ended up the way that I did, Rowan nodded. It's him. It's Archmage King Edric. Nyra opened her mouth to speak, but closed it just as fast. How could she find the words in such a moment, when his kindness radiated in such a way that it made her feel stupid for being so cynical? Rowan, buddy. When she knew what she was about to say would break her friend's heart. King Edric. Rowan simply stared at her. He's dead. What? Rowan blinked. He's dead? Nyra nodded, a soft frown still lingering. For a long time now. You're joking. Nyra shook her head, the honesty in her emerald eyes unwavering. Nyra had no reason to lie, yet Rowan still struggled to accept the truth. But it can't be. Rowan shook his head, trying desperately to come to grips with the revelation. It was at the Lyceum. I spoke to him right before I woke up in prison. And Cassian, what happened to the prince? If you mean King Cassian, he took his rightful place on the throne after his old man passed away. Nyra sighed, scratching her chin. Must have been a couple of years ago now, maybe? The timeline made no sense to Rowan. How? Nyra repeated. What do you mean? How did Edric? Rowan closed his eyes, clenching his fist. How did the king die? Well, they said his health had been failing for a while. He was getting up there in years, Nyra explained, though Rowan already knew as much. That's the official story they gave anyway. I see. And so he passed away of natural causes? That's my best guess. Rowan tried to accept the explanation, but the thought of the greatest man he had ever known being dead still felt unreal. If anyone could have cheated death's unyielding grasp, he had always believed it would be Edric, a man with the strength of ancient stone and a spirit too large to be diminished by age. But age catches up to all, including the Archmage King. He passed before he could see the era of peace, after the hero defeated the fractured god. Some era it's been for us, though. Nyra shrugged. The poor and miserable are as poor and miserable as ever, if you ask me. Ah. Rowan cast his gaze down before processing the last of what Nyra said. Wait. The war is over? Yeah? Nyra's face only grew more confused. Wait. You're telling me you didn't even know that? Rowan nodded. The news should have filled him with relief. Instead, grief crept through his chest like a strangling vine, and his thoughts turned to Cassian, his adoptive brother. But he's just a 14-year-old boy, Rowan muttered. Cassian is a bright kid, but shouldn't they have appointed a council of regents to run the country? Rowan stopped speaking when his companion tilted her head to the side. 14? Rowan, pal, just how old do you think you are? 18? No, I guess I'd have to be around 19 now. He paused. Why? Rowan. Nyra crossed her arms. I'm in my 20s, and with all due respect, there's no way you're younger than I am. Of all the mounting evidence, the thing the man refused to believe was the changes to himself. Though she had no reason to lie to him, he didn't feel any different physically. Rather than try to convince him, however, they walked down a path through the forest when they heard a flowing source of water cutting through the dense woods. Rowan walked right up to the surface, as clear and still as he could find. Kneeling beside the body of water, he took a great, long look at his face for the first time since he woke up in chains. No. He brought his trembling hands up to his cheeks, stained with dirt. He had crow's feet, stubble painting his weathered chin. The truth could no longer be denied. His complexion was almost ghostly, a faded scar marking his cheek from a battle he couldn't even remember. I just don't understand it. Any of it. Nyra acknowledged that the truth would be difficult to absorb and told him to take whatever time he needed. Rowan did not remain still for long. If years had passed for him, then years had passed for his family as well. He could not waste another moment before finding them. Nyra pointed out that Edric, the center of his plan, was gone. She asked what they were supposed to do now. Rowan admitted that the plan had depended on the former king. Even so, another person remained. They would travel west. Nyra hesitantly warned that Cassian might no longer be the boy Rowan remembered. Rowan refused to believe his brother would abandon him. Cassian was family. Whatever else had changed, Rowan trusted that bond. He looked toward the western horizon, where the afternoon sun had begun to fall. They would go to Archmage King Cassian. Inside Asterhold's throne room, the great doors burst open. A heavy-set messenger hurried across the marble floor, holding a scroll in one hand, while using the other to keep his trousers from slipping. He dropped awkwardly to one knee before the throne. The young king watched him with cool blue eyes and ordered him to state his business. The messenger reported news from the east. Dreadmere prison had fallen. Cassian first asked whether an enemy force had captured it. The messenger explained that the disaster had been a mass escape. When soldiers reached the prison, they found the warden and his senior lieutenants dead by military suicide. Cassian called the loss a tragedy. The warden had been a friend of his father and, by the king's judgment, a decent man. He summoned a well-dressed servant with a snap of his fingers and ordered proper burials for the dead, with their families notified as soon as men could be spared. After the servant rushed away, Cassian turned back to the messenger and calmly requested the rest of the report. The messenger hurried through the rest of his report. Every surviving prisoner had escaped. Cassian's smile disappeared for only a heartbeat, enough to make the messenger flinch, before returning as the king thoughtfully tapped one cheek. He asked about the hero. The scouts had not found Rowan. The messenger cautiously offered to send additional search parties. Cassian refused. More scouts would waste resources. If he understood Rowan at all, then the escaped man was already traveling toward Asterhold. The messenger did not understand. Cassian snapped his fingers, and a young rabbit-folk servant in formal palace clothes appeared beside the throne. The king announced that they would receive an important guest that night and ordered her to ensure he was treated properly upon arrival. Then he asked the messenger whether Rowan had escaped alone. The surviving guards had reported a demi-human companion, a harpy girl, who fled with him. Cassian was delighted. He ordered a second chair placed at the banquet table and instructed the kitchens to prepare a feast for the following night. After the servant left for the kitchens, Cassian dismissed the messenger and praised him for bringing such welcome news. The man bowed and departed, still confused by the king's joy. Alone on the throne, Cassian's smile became warm and personal. He spoke into the empty hall as if sharing the news with someone unseen. The kingdom's hero was returning. More importantly, his brother, Rowan Halcrest, was coming home. By the time Rowan and Nyra left Dreadmere Forest, the narrow road had widened into a highway. The trees thinned behind them, opening onto vast plains of green grass that stretched toward the eastern horizon. Both fugitives still wore torn prison uniforms. They believed news of the escape had not yet reached the surrounding settlements, but they hid whenever travelers approached rather than test their luck. Nyra soon complained that they could not creep all the way to Asterhold. At that pace, they would be as old as the warden before arriving. They needed fresh clothes, supplies, and somewhere to sleep. Rowan agreed. His uniform was torn and stained with blood. He asked where she expected to find what they needed. Nyra suggested the next settlement along the highway. With luck, it would have a few shops and an inn. Rowan did not remember any nearby town from his previous travels, though his memory had become too unreliable to trust. He raised another problem. Neither of them appeared to have money. A smug light entered Nyra's eyes. She scolded him for underestimating her and explained that she would never have escaped without keeping emergency funds hidden. From beneath her prison clothing, Nyra produced a single gold coin and rolled it proudly across her fingers. Rowan wisely chose not to ask where she had concealed it. In the kingdom of Elaris, one silver coin was worth roughly 100 copper pieces, and one gold coin was worth close to 100 silvers. Nyra was holding a small fortune, at least by the standards of two fugitives who owned nothing. Rowan's suspicion must have shown. Nyra immediately insisted that she had not stolen the money, or at least not all of it at the same time. His raised eyebrow made her defensive. She reminded him that the coin was everything she possessed. They would have to spend carefully and avoid being robbed before reaching the capital. A little gratitude, she added, would also be appreciated. Rowan realized that he had been unfair. His mother had taught both him and his sister to value anyone willing to share their last coin. Whatever the money's history, Nyra was offering all of it to help them survive. He apologized. Nyra admitted she had only been teasing, but Rowan promised to repay every expense once they reached his family farm. The mention of a farm caught her attention. Rowan explained that the land belonged to the entire Halcrest family and had remained in their clan for generations. More than the property itself, however, he wanted to return to the people who lived there. Nyra looked across the endless plain with a distant smile and said it must be nice to have somewhere to go home to. Before Rowan could ask about her own past, she pointed toward the road ahead. A frontier town had appeared beyond the hill. Stone chimneys released lazy trails of smoke. Wagons passed beneath wooden arches into a busy market square, and tidy fields of green and gold surrounded the settlement under a wide blue sky. The landscape reminded Rowan of home, though he was still surprised that Nyra's town had actually existed. She jokingly accused him of doubting her and hurried forward. She wanted to abandon the filthy prison clothes and rest her aching tail feathers. Rowan followed, already wondering whether the town had a restaurant serving meat. The prison gruel had never satisfied him. At an outfitter, Nyra emerged from behind a dressing curtain and presented her new clothes with a flourish. Rowan applauded and told her the outfit suited her. She had chosen clothing designed for movement rather than attention. A cropped leather vest tied in front with red cord, a black choker, tan harem trousers that widened at the thighs, and a copper coin belt supporting a small satchel. Cloth wraps secured the trousers above her taloned feet, with matching bands at her wrists. The outfit left her shoulders, neck, and midriff exposed, likely by personal preference. When Nyra caught Rowan looking toward her stomach, he quickly turned away. She narrowed her eyes and warned him not to entertain strange ideas. Rowan innocently asked what ideas she meant. The question made Nyra blush. She stammered that men often became strange around such clothing, and Rowan was undeniably a man. He confirmed that fact with a laugh, then spared her further embarrassment by going to change. A moment later, Rowan returned wearing a plain white shirt, laced at the collar, durable grey trousers, and a thick leather belt. A brown satchel crossed his chest like a bandolier. Without horses, they needed some way to carry food and supplies. Nyra studied him and called the outfit plain. After thinking about it, she decided plainness suited him. Rowan asked what that was supposed to mean. Nyra explained that when the prisoners called him a legendary hero, she had been unable to imagine it. If Rowan truly was the man from the stories, he would have to be the most boring hero in the world. Rowan chose to treat that as a compliment, though he was not certain it was one. Nyra then admitted that sharing a name with the hero, claiming connections to the royal family, and displaying impossible strength made for a remarkable coincidence. Rowan hesitated. For the moment, he decided that coincidence was all it could be. They left the shop carrying their old uniforms in a burlap sack. The elderly tailor accepted a silver coin without asking why the clothes were torn and stained. Given their condition, fear had probably silenced his curiosity. Before buying anything else, Rowan and Nyra checked the public notices for reports of escaped prisoners. None had appeared. They were still ahead of the news. Using the gold carefully, they purchased only what could fit in their satchels, basic supplies and dried food for the journey west. They also allowed themselves a substantial dinner after months of prison meals. That night, the pair shared one room at the inn, with separate beds on opposite sides. Nyra fell asleep almost immediately. She snored with the force of a grown man, kicked off her blankets, and rolled around in search of comfort. At one point, she scratched her side and mumbled through a foolish grin that no one could catch Nyra. The sight was so different from her guarded behavior while awake that Rowan could only smile. His cuffs remained in place, making sleep uncomfortable. Moonlight entered through the open window and spread across the floor beneath a sky full of stars. During his imprisonment, Rowan had often comforted himself by imagining that the people he loved were looking at the same moon. It was one of the few connections the prison could not take from him. The next day, he believed he would finally see one of those people. He would have questions for Cassian. Why had no one searched for him? How much time had truly passed? And why did everyone believe that Rowan was the hero who had defeated the fractured god? Those questions could wait until morning. Rowan extinguished the candle and closed his eyes. Morning arrived without birdsong. When Rowan woke for his habitual exercises, the air was unnaturally still. Nyra's bed was empty. He called her name and searched the balcony, the lobby, and the tavern where they had eaten. Nyra was not the only one missing. Every room in the inn stood silent. The market square held no merchants or customers, and the lively settlement from the previous evening had become completely empty. Above it, a low overcast sky pressed down like fog. Rowan threw on his boots and hurried from the room, still wearing the simple nightclothes provided by the inn. Every wooden plank creaked beneath his steps as he crossed the tavern and entered the street. Something was wrong. The entire settlement appeared deserted. Then he noticed a solitary figure at the far end of the road, half hidden by the fog. Its shoulders were hunched, and it stood shorter than Rowan. He called out and asked whether the stranger was all right. There seemed to be no one else in town, and he wanted to know what had happened. As Rowan drew closer, the figure came into focus. It was not a person. Dozens of birds had twisted themselves together into a rough human shape. Wings, claws, and black feathers writhed against one another as though the creatures were fighting over something buried inside the mass. The sight filled Rowan with immediate revulsion. He stepped back, his stomach turning. The mist closed behind him. The tavern and every surrounding building vanished, leaving no path of retreat. At the sound of Rowan's breath, every bird turned. Their eyes burned red. The flock broke apart and descended on him. Beaks snapped at his neck and hands. Wings beat against his face, while Rowan covered his eyes to keep them from being torn out. He shouted for the birds to stop and fought blindly until, after what felt like an eternity, they scattered. Rowan stood panting. Only then did he see what the crows had gathered around. A rotting corpse lay in the street. The horror was not merely the state of the body. It belonged to Nyra. Rowan backed away, repeating her name and refusing to accept what he saw. He collided with something behind him. A voice asked why he had left them. Rowan turned. The thing wore Nyra's face, but its eye sockets were hollow. Foul breath burned his eyes, and black fluid ran down its cheeks like tears. A bony hand seized his jaw and forced him to stare into the empty sockets. Again, it asked why he had left them. Rowan insisted that he had not abandoned anyone, but uncertainty crept into his voice. He could not remember enough of his past to know whether the accusation was true. The creature promised that he would remember. Darkness swallowed him from head to foot. When Rowan opened his eyes again, the fog had vanished. He stood inside a circular arena filled with ash and dust. Countless shadows surrounded him. Some resembled people he almost recognized. Others had no meaning at all. Together, they repeated the same command. Pick it up. Rowan's axe lay in the center of the ring, exactly as he remembered leaving it near the in-room door. The purple jewel at its center shone like an eye and called him forward. The chanting grew louder. When Rowan hesitated, the crowd began hurling insults, spoiled fruit, and stones. He absorbed every blow in a daze until his legs carried him toward the weapon. With each step, the shadows became quieter. The noise inside his own head grew worse. His hands closed around the haft. Static burned through his thoughts, carrying a broken voice that sounded disturbingly like his own. Rowan repeated the command to himself. Pick it up. Somewhere beyond the arena, Nyra called his name. He ignored her at first. Laughter spilled from his mouth as the voice in his mind swelled into a roar. Pick it up, hero. Beyond the arena, Nyra screamed his name. Rowan woke. Sweat covered his back. His lungs dragged in ragged breaths while the room slowly came into focus. Nyra stood beside the bed. Relief nearly overwhelmed him. Then she asked, with growing irritation, whether he would put down the axe. Rowan looked at his hand. He was gripping the enormous weapon one-handed over the side of the bed, as though it weighed nothing. He distinctly remembered leaving it near the door. Unable to explain how it had reached him, Rowan apologized and gently placed it at the foot of the bed. Nyra told him it was already afternoon. Rowan normally woke before her, so finding him asleep while apparently preparing to split the furniture had frightened her. He apologized again. Nyra folded her arms and pointed out how often he said that word. Rowan admitted she might be right. Seeing the dazed expression on his face, Nyra advised him not to punish himself for every small mistake. He should save the guilt for something genuinely foolish. Rowan almost apologized yet again, caught himself, and promised to try. Nyra brightened, slapped him on the back, and ordered him to get ready. If they wanted to reach Asterhold before dark and stay ahead of bounty hunters, they had to leave immediately. Rowan watched her gather their belongings. His smile faded as one part of the dream remained in his mind. The accusation from the dream lingered in Rowan's mind. Why did you leave us? As far as he knew, he had abandoned no one. But the man who had lived through the missing years might have done things he could not remember. He struck his cheeks to stop the thought. Edric might be dead, but the rest of his family was still waiting. Nyra paused in the doorway and asked whether he was coming. Rowan hesitated with his hand above the axe. Then he picked it up and followed. By midday, they stood before Asterhold's eastern gate. White granite walls rose beyond the Veyra River, connected to the frontier by a bridge so long it appeared to float across the blue water. For centuries, invaders had called the capital unconquerable. Generations of archmage kings and a population rich with capable mages were part of the reason. The enchanted walls were the greater one. Rowan stared upward and remarked that the city looked far brighter than he remembered. The bridge repairs had also been completed since the last dragon attack. Nyra asked whether anything else seemed different. Like what? Like those guards way over there? Nyra crossed her arms. Wagons rolled past them toward the checkpoint beneath the open gate. You know, the ones who are obviously going to arrest us when we try to walk in. Just act natural, Rowan assured her with unusual confidence. As far as they know, we're just a couple of travelers, and the city has always maintained a pretty lax immigration policy. They did, you mean? Nyra corrected him. Things have changed a bit since your brother took over. That's why I asked in the first place. Maybe they have, Rowan thought for a moment. In that case, I'll just be honest and tell them who I am. Cassian's still my brother, so it'll be fine. I promise. Nyra privately thought that the plan depended on the guards recognizing Rowan without recognizing her. Do you seriously believe that they'd just whatever? Nyra groaned, running a hand through her hair. She didn't have the heart to argue. But if we get locked up in prison together again, I'm getting the window cell this time. I really hate the dark, you know. See? Rowan smiled. Now you're thinking positively. That is literally the opposite of what I said. Natural, Rowan reminded her. I can do the talking, if you'd prefer. And get us executed as a bonus, Nyra scoffed, crossing her hands into an X. No way, no sir, I'll come up with the lie, at the very least. Just focus on being your natural self, pal, and stay as quiet as possible, and try to keep those cuffs behind your back. Rowan nodded once at her continued warnings, stifling a small chuckle. With that, the two of them joined the line of travelers crossing the Vera. Most arrived on horseback or in covered wagons to escape the afternoon sun, though a handful, like Rowan and Nyra, made the journey on foot. Next, after what felt like hours, they finally reached the front of the queue. The heavily armored guard didn't even bother looking at them at first. He wore a circlet instead of a helmet like the other guards, the mark of a commanding officer. "What is the purpose of your visit?" he asked curtly. "We're here to see my brother." Nyra opened her mouth a split second too late, Rowan beating her to the punch again. The king. Nyra silently despaired. Rowan had ignored her plan and spoken first. "Your brother's the king?" "Adopted brother," Rowan nodded. "But that's right." Nyra could only think that they were dead. The guard let out a tired sigh before finally looking up from his report. "So, you're seeing family in the city?" "I take it. Length of stay?" "Just for the rest of today, sir." "Is that right?" When the guard noticed the cuffs, Nyra became certain they were finished. Nyra braced herself for the worst. "Very well then," he gestured toward the open gate. "You may proceed." "Thank you, my good man." Nyra stared after him, unable to believe the officer had actually waved them through. "Nyra?" Rowan noticed she hadn't moved as he pressed forward. He waved his arm. "Come on, they're letting us in." "Oh, okay." Once they were clear of the entrance, Rowan gave Nyra a satisfied grin and reminded her that he had predicted success. She stared at him and told him not to speak. Asterhold's Eastern Plaza was familiar in shape, but entirely different in spirit. Rowan remembered flower stalls filling the streets and children climbing over the great fountain. Now the square was spotless, subdued, and nearly silent. Pedestrians moved with lowered attention, avoiding one another. A large sign beside the fountain prohibited loitering. When an elderly couple paused to admire the water, a guard politely but firmly ordered them onward. Rowan watched with growing unease. This was not the city he remembered. Rowan and Nyra wandered along the outer districts of Asterhold. The musician's corner had vanished. Where lutes, fiddles, and street vendors once competed for attention, only the subdued murmur of passing conversations remained. The same polished order extended beyond the Eastern Plaza. Every street displayed freshly cleaned white stone, carefully trimmed hedges, and storefronts arranged with almost unnatural uniformity. The entire city seemed carved into a flawless work of art. Rowan found himself conflicted. Asterhold was cleaner, better maintained, and perhaps safer than the city he remembered. Yet something important had disappeared. Nyra asked whether he disliked the king's renovations or simply felt overwhelmed by the changes. Rowan remembered sitting in the old plaza beside dwarves, beastfolk, merchants, beggars, and nobles. It had never been orderly, but it had been alive. Now voices remained low. Footsteps echoed where music once played. People waited patiently instead of haggling, arguing, or lingering. Rowan also noticed very few non-humans in the streets, though he could not yet decide whether that was deliberate. He admitted that the capital looked cleaner, but also much lonelier. The tastes of Edric and Cassian had always differed. Even as a boy, Cassian had cared deeply about appearances. Rowan also remembered guards and knights smiling more often when he was preparing to join their ranks. Nyra said she had usually been running away from guards and had never looked back long enough to inspect their expressions. Rowan conceded that before Dreadmere, he had rarely needed to fear them. They turned toward the center of the city. The castle rose above nearly every district, making direction easy. Avoiding distractions proved more difficult. A loud growl interrupted the silence. Rowan and Nyra simultaneously suggested finding food. 5 minutes later, all plans to go directly to the castle had disappeared. Both carried absurd collections of skewers and street snacks, while attempting to compensate for a year of prison meals. Rowan eventually declared that he could not eat another bite. Nyra, still chewing grilled chicken, insisted that she could. Rowan almost commented on the similarity between a birdfolk woman and the meat on her skewer, then wisely stopped. Nyra sensed the unfinished joke and accused him of preparing to say something foolish. Rowan put his hands in his pockets and whistled. As they prepared to continue, a small body collided with Rowan's knee. The impact barely affected him, but the child bounced backward and rubbed her forehead. A little girl with brown pigtails apologized. From her perspective, Rowan's height made him enormous. Even Nyra stood far above her. The girl looked up, noticed Rowan's face, and broke into a wide smile that revealed one missing tooth. She announced that she knew him. Rowan suggested she had mistaken him for someone else. The child insisted she had seen his face before, though she could not remember where. Nyra began to ask whether the girl also confused him with the legendary hero, but the child stopped her, concentrated fiercely, and then admitted she had forgotten. Nyra signaled that they should leave. Rowan gently told the girl that she was charming, but that they had important business before dark. The child grabbed the back of his shirt with both hands and dug her shoes against the stone to stop him. She begged him to wait. The answer was on the edge of her memory. Then, she developed a plan. If they retraced every place she had visited that morning, she believed she would remember why Rowan looked familiar. Nyra pulled Rowan aside and reminded him that bounty hunters were likely searching for them. They needed to reach Cassian and secure a pardon before ending up in another cell. Rowan understood, but he could not simply abandon the child in the street. When they looked back, the girl was batting her eyelashes with exaggerated innocence. Nyra surrendered. Rowan could follow the child for a while, she said, because Nyra had separate business in the slums. The man who betrayed her was apparently hiding somewhere in Asterhold. Rowan immediately asked whether she intended violence. Nyra promised not to kill anyone. She only wanted to talk. Her expression did not make the promise convincing. Before leaving, she told Rowan to stay out of trouble. He assured her that avoiding trouble had always been one of his greatest talents, at least until recently. Nyra hurried away. Rowan returned his attention to the girl. Being back in Asterhold filled him with a nostalgia that survived even the city's unsettling changes. He asked where they should begin, then realized he did not know her name. She introduced herself as Leora, though her friends called her Leah. Without bothering to ask Rowan's name, she seized his hand and pulled him down the street. For all his impossible strength, Rowan remained helpless against a determined little girl. Their memory tour began in one of Asterhold's poorer neighborhoods, far from the main streets. Leah stopped before a small patchwork shack with netting instead of glass over its windows. She proudly introduced it as Nana Hetty's shop, where she and the other children had played that morning. Rowan asked how the location might help her identify him. He offered to give her his name as a clue. Leah rejected the suggestion. Hints were cheating. They would follow her feet. Rowan corrected that she meant retracing her steps. Leah decided the phrases were close enough. The wooden door opened, and a frail elderly woman greeted Leah with affection. Seeing Rowan beside her, she asked about the handsome young guest. Leah explained that she was trying to remember him. She knew his face, but could not place it. Nana Hetty studied Rowan through worn spectacles. Her back curved beneath a quilted blouse, and her hands remained folded behind her. She did not appear to recognize him immediately. Instead, she explained that children had few safe places left to play, so she kept watch over them. To her, it felt as though she had awakened one morning to find the entire city changed. Rowan said he understood the feeling. This was his first visit to Asterhold in longer than he could clearly remember. The old woman disappeared briefly into the shop and returned with a small container of medicinal balm. Rowan did not understand why she offered it until Hetty pointed toward his shoulder. His wound had opened again without his noticing. When he touched the area, his fingers came away red. The old woman told Leah to take care and said she needed to lie down because her joints were aching. She hoped the child would recover her memory. Leah cheerfully said goodbye. Rowan held the balm as though it were precious and thanked Hetty. She offered only a gentle smile before closing the door. The encounter had awakened a memory in the old woman as well, but she chose not to reveal it. Some discoveries, she believed, should be made by the people searching for them. Leah's next stop was the Eastern Fountain. The moment she and Rowan paused, a patrol guard ordered them to move along. Leah stomped away and called him a mean man. Rowan had to hide his laughter. As they continued, she asked about the angry bird woman who had been with him. Then she wondered whether Nyra was Rowan's mistress. Rowan inhaled so sharply that he choked and began coughing. Leah stopped to pat his back while he struggled to deny the suggestion. He finally explained that Nyra was a good friend and asked who had taught a 6-year-old such a word. Leah said her mother believed opposites attracted, which was how she had found Leah's father. Rowan admitted that he and Nyra were different, but called her his traveling companion. They were simply trying to regain their freedom. Leah declared the explanation boring. She also objected to being called a child. At 6.5, she insisted, she led the younger children. Rowan accepted her authority and asked where their leader planned to take them next. For a moment, Leah forgot. Then her face brightened. Rowan asked whether she had finally remembered him. She corrected him. She had only remembered the next place she visited that morning. With renewed enthusiasm, Leah pulled him onward. Their next stop was a baker's stall. Of all the things in Asterhold that had changed, the smell of fresh bread and pastries remained irresistible. Rowan could almost taste the sourdough from across the street. Then he noticed Leah had stopped at a distance. She stared openly at the sweets, a small line of drool at the corner of her mouth, but made no move toward the stall. When Rowan asked why, Leah admitted that she and the other children often came only to look. They could not afford to buy anything, though even the smell was a small pleasure. Rowan told her to wait. He approached the stall and checked the loose emergency change Nyra had given him. Buying a treat was not exactly an emergency, but he decided the expense was justified. The bull baker stopped kneading dough and welcomed him. Everything had been baked fresh at a larger shop farther down the road. Rowan ordered 1 loaf of sourdough and a chocolate cookie for Leah. Then he remembered Nyra and changed the order to 2 loaves. The second loaf would not still be warm when Nyra received it, but sharing bread had become a quiet tradition between them. The total came to 5 copper pieces. As the baker searched for his tongs, he remarked that Rowan looked familiar and asked whether he had visited the area before. Rowan said he had. He explained that Leah also believed she recognized him, which was why they were retracing her morning. The baker remembered the little girl and her friends. When he packed the order, he quietly added a second cookie at no charge. Rowan was surprised by the generosity. The baker explained that near closing time he often had bread he could no longer sell. He still had a business to operate, but anything left over might as well feed the children. Then, an old memory came to him. During the war, a knight in training had often visited the neighborhood. Life had been difficult for everyone, yet the young man always found time for poor children, even when he seemed as busy as the king. That trainee had made a name for himself. Rowan lingered on the story until Leah called impatiently from across the street. He thanked the baker and offered a blessing from the Radiant One. After Rowan left, the baker smiled to himself. He had not remembered the old knight as especially religious, and the man had never worn a rosary either. Leah ate her cookie with sparkling eyes. It was the quietest she had been all day. Rowan told her to thank the baker later and explained that leftover food might be available if the children visited near closing time. Leah clearly knew the next destination, so Rowan followed. They had traveled far from the place where Nyra left them, and he began to wonder how his companion would find him. At last, Leah stopped and said they had reached the final place she visited. Before colliding with Rowan, Asterhold Grand Cathedral rose above the surrounding rooftops. Rowan had spent more time there than anywhere else in the capital outside the Crown Lyceum. The cathedral was the heart of the Church of the 6 Luminaries and the official seat of every recognized religious order in the kingdom. Leah looked disappointed. Even after retracing the entire morning, she still could not remember why Rowan's face was familiar. Rowan asked why the answer mattered so much to her. At first, Leah admitted the search had simply sounded fun. Then Rowan bought her a cookie, while Nana Hetty and the baker both seemed to like him. Tears gathered in her eyes. If she had forgotten someone that kind, she would feel terrible. Rowan had already delayed his own mission far longer than intended, but he had grown fond of Leah and did not want her to blame herself. Looking up at the cathedral's great arches, he found another idea. Entering would not merely continue their game, it would also allow him to fulfill something he had intended to do upon returning to the city. Though she didn't sound sure it would help, Rowan had a hunch it might. As they walked into the grand cathedral, the ancient architecture took Rowan's breath away, as if it were the first time he was seeing it. Huge stained glass murals lined the walls, faithfully depicting each of the 6 luminaries and their magic affinities. Whoa! Leah twirled around, equally impressed by the size and scale of the nave, a main room where a service might take place. People really meet in here? Uh-huh. Rowan nodded, gesturing toward the altar at the front of the room. Followers of each divine have their own day of the week to meet, and then one for all to rest. There are no services today, so we can pray freely. You're well educated, young man. That's right. A man emerged from a room to Rowan and Leah's left. I'm Deacon Orlan. Welcome to Asterhold Grand Cathedral. Thank you for having us, sir. Will be but a moment. No, please take your time. The deacon assured them that there was no rush. However, might I ask which of the divines you have come to offer a prayer to? The Radiant One, and to my father, Rowan replied. May I use the altar? A devoted son, then. The deacon smiled. By all means, child, the central altar is yours. I will prepare the ceremonial incense. At the center of the sanctuary, towering above the main altar, stood the Radiant One, cloaked in brilliant light. One mural beside it, a 7th, however, had long since been painted over grey to match the cathedral's brick walls. The incense has been lit, children. May the Radiant One hear your prayer. When he smelled the incense burning and heard the retreating footsteps of Deacon Orlan, Rowan tented his hands together neatly at chest level. His prisoner's cuffs clinked as he did, noticeable in the quiet. Radiant One, if he has truly returned to you, Rowan began a prayer for safe passage for his adoptive father into the afterlife. Thank you for letting him become my father, Edric. Leah, meanwhile, fidgeted around with her hands, not quite sure what to do with them. It was only after a few moments of looking forward that she finally decided to glance up at Rowan. But as she took note of his posture and pose, hands pressed together and a tear rolling down his cheek, did she realize something? Radiant One, receive his soul into your keeping, Solon. Wiping away the tears with his sleeve, Rowan finally noticed the pair of eyes monitoring his face. Leah looked like the gears in her head were finally turning again, which made Rowan chuckle. Close to a breakthrough? I think so, but I really didn't go anywhere else today. She tapped her chin thoughtfully. To be honest, Leah, I should probably start looking for my friend. Rowan knelt down, laying a hand on her shoulder. We were supposed to head to the castle district together, so that's where I'll start looking. Oh, even Leah, as young as she was, realized she couldn't justify taking any more of the man's time. Then, can I come with you just until you find her? Rowan hesitated for only a moment before smiling. All right, and then straight home before it gets dark, understand? Yep. By then, evening had colored the sky the same warm orange as Rowan's eyes. Daytime stalls began to close, while inns and taverns lit their windows for the night. It was later than Rowan hoped. Even during Edric's reign, the castle rarely received important guests at such an hour, much less escaped prisoners. Rowan disliked imposing on anyone, even if the king was his brother. He decided they would find Nyra first, then choose whether to rent another room and approach the palace in the morning. A voice called from above. Nyra dropped into the street in front of them with the grace of an angry angel. Rowan stepped back, one hand already moving toward the axe across his back. Nyra grinned and asked whether she had frightened him. She had been searching from the rooftops, spotted Rowan and Leah leaving the cathedral, and followed them for a while before. Announcing herself. Rowan denied being startled, though the tension in his body said otherwise. He observed that her ability to move unseen explained why wallets vanished around her. Nyra placed a hand over her chest and called it talent. Rowan noticed that her knuckles were not bruised and guessed that her planned conversation had never happened. Nyra praised his growing sarcasm but warned that true skill required moderation. Then she admitted the man who betrayed her had already fled the city. Bitterness entered her expression. Rowan said there would be another chance. Nyra turned her attention to Leah and asked whether Rowan had decided to adopt the child. Rowan explained that Leah had only promised to stay until they found Nyra. Leah raised both arms and celebrated the successful mission. A moment later, she stretched and yawned. Nyra confessed that she was exhausted as well and suggested finding a place to sleep. Rowan was about to tell Leah it was time to go home when the castle district appeared beyond the final row of buildings. White stone extended toward the drawbridge. Blue and silver banners bearing the crest of the kingdom of Elaris moved in the evening breeze. Leah recovered all her energy at once and ran ahead, urging them to reach the castle before sunset. Rowan sighed and hurried after her. Nyra followed without complaint. Leah rounded a corner and stopped dead in her tracks, a flock of white birds flying overhead. The little girl's mouth fell open as her finger rose with a tiny tremble. "Mister," excitement betrayed the low tone of her voice. "I remembered." Rowan and Nyra caught up a moment later. She spun around so quickly to meet them that she nearly tripped over herself. "I remembered. It's you." Rowan and Nyra followed her finger instinctively. On either side of the drawbridge stood two towering statues. One depicted an elderly Archmage King Edric, scepter planted proudly before him. The sight initially elicited a sad smile. But the other, a broad-shouldered young man, rested both hands atop the pommel of a great axe with a purple jewel in its center. His gaze fixed toward the horizon. His hair was slicked back, his cheek featuring the same scar, and he had a pair of unmistakably sharp but kind eyes. Rowan was no longer smiling. The stunned silence between them lasted a few moments before Nyra finally broke it in her most careful fashion. "You don't happen to have a twin?" "No." Rowan never looked away. "I don't." Rowan put one foot in front of the other as he walked up to the base of the great statue. His hand came to rest on a well-maintained plaque at the bottom, beneath his likeness. Whatever hope of coincidence he'd clung to shattered in an instant. "In honor of the hero who freed humanity from the fractured god," he began, his voice flat. "For 10 years of sacrifice." Hero, Rowan Halcrest. Seeing the emptiness in his gaze, Nyra placed a supportive hand on his back. He wasn't shocked. Rowan wasn't a fool. He had seen the pieces falling into place for days. Eyes that recognized him but couldn't quite make the connection, his very name bringing a whole prison to the ground. But his heart knew from the beginning. A decade, perhaps more, was missing. Rowan could not understand who he had been during those lost years. "The storyteller said you disappeared." Leah folded her hands. "Where've you been?" The question from his nightmare returned. "Why did you leave us?" Rowan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. How could he explain 10, 11, possibly an even greater number of years he couldn't remember? As Nyra attempted to offer him a word of encouragement, a trumpet sounded from beyond the courtyard. The drawbridge fell, clattering down on the ground between the two statues. Two lines of crown wardens in brilliant silver and blue armor came walking across, stopping to make a tunnel around Rowan and Nyra. Rowan met Nyra's eyes. However, they weren't seized by the knights. Instead, a man walked down the middle to greet them with a scroll in hand. After clearing his throat, he called out, "By decree of His Majesty, Archmage King Cassian Solmare." There would be no turning back now. Sir Rowan Halcrest and guest are hereby invited to an official audience. This was it. Ready or not, this was what they came for. Talk of heroes, memories, and duty would have to wait. Rowan prepared himself for a family reunion, with nothing short of his and Nyra's freedom hanging in the balance. "You two, please come with me." A royal escort led them through a succession of castle corridors toward the dressing chambers. Asterhold's streets had seemed excessively polished. The palace carried that taste to an almost wasteful extreme. White marble floors reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead. Every wall and ceiling carried immaculate blue and gold trim, while paintings and ornaments occupied nearly every empty space. Rowan whispered that the castle had always been grand, but never quite so extravagant. Cassian had loved appearances even as a child. Nyra agreed. Anything within reach looked valuable enough to make her rich, though she kept both hands deliberately at her sides. A butler opened a tall wooden door into enormous dressing rooms. After a year in cramped cells, neither fugitive found reason to object to too much space. A golden-haired knight captain informed them that they were expected to bathe before meeting the king. The women's facilities were to the left and the men's to the right. The water, he warned, would be hot, but no finer bath existed in the kingdom. Rowan struggled to hide his delight. The Frontier Inn had offered little more than cold water for a quick rinse. The captain also recommended changing into formal clothing prepared for the audience. Nyra immediately refused. They would wear their own clothes. Her bluntness irritated the officer, but he accepted the decision. One of his men would escort them to the throne room once they were ready. The captain left. Maids and butlers remained nearby to provide anything requested, but no armed guard stood inside. Even stranger, no one had taken Rowan's axe or searched their satchels. Nyra whispered that the entire reception felt wrong. Rowan had noticed nothing and asked what she meant. She explained that the knights at the drawbridge, and even the captain, had looked terrified of Rowan. Their fear resembled the warden's. They watched him as if he might suddenly lose control, like men, standing too close to a caged beast. Rowan had assumed the attention was respect or caution toward a famous savior. Still, he trusted Nyra's ability to read people. If the soldiers feared him, he wondered, why had they allowed him to keep the axe? Nyra had no answer. Whatever they believed, the truth would soon become clear, and they needed to remain prepared. Rowan carried the question into the bath. Hot water removed the road's dirt and eased the soreness from his body, but it could not relieve the pressure in his mind. Blue and red magic crystals rested at the pool's corners, one purifying the water and the other maintaining its heat. Rowan cupped water in his bound hands and splashed it over his face. Droplets ran through his dark blue hair. For the first time in proper light, he studied his torso. Scars covered his broad chest, most faded by years. In the darkness of Dreadmere, he had never examined them closely. Now, there was no room left for denial. Rowan said the truth aloud. He had been the hero. The idea made him laugh in disbelief. He had always imagined many people better qualified to end a world war. The reason he accepted the task was easier to understand. Rowan had wanted to become a knight, and Edric had believed in him. In those days, he would have done anything for the kingdom, and for the man who had become his father. Perhaps that devotion had also explained how he became strong enough. Rowan had repaid his debt with 10 years of battle. Now the debt was gone, the war was over, and much of his power seemed beyond his conscious reach. For the first time, he could decide what he wanted, rather than what duty demanded. The calm that settled over his face told him the answer. He knew what he would tell Cassian. As much as he wanted to pretend this was just another visit with family, the thumping of his heart fell into rhythm with their footsteps as they made their way to the throne room. Even Nyra, who carried herself with practiced nonchalance, wore a tense expression that reached her emerald green eyes. Her gaze moved over every curious butler, maid, and soldier with suspicion. But Rowan was grateful for her vigilance, because he couldn't think of anything besides what he would say to his brother, Cassian, when they entered. 2 imposing wooden doors creaked open to reveal a royal blue carpet that stretched endlessly. The room ahead was dark, with the light crystals lining the walls, casting only enough illumination to illuminate a small circle. They were stopped by their escort as he stepped off to the side. A clap originated from deeper within the room, twice, and all the light crystals shone brilliantly, with enough intensity to finally light the room. The throne room was magnificent, but Rowan hardly saw any of it. At the end of the ceremonial runner sat a man adorned with the finest coat of white fur and gold embroidery. His wavy black hair, blue eyes, and the mole on his cheek were exactly as Rowan remembered, but he wore what was unquestionably the face of a man. "Approach the throne!" At a knight's command, Rowan and Nyra walked in lockstep down the carpet that had been rolled out for their arrival. Rowan's eyes remained fixed on Cassian's, unwavering as he wore his most confident expression. Inside, his emotions were all over the place, but he could ill afford to let that show given the moment. As they reached the foot of the dais, crossed spears briefly barred the final few steps. This was as close as anyone was allowed to stand before the Archmage King. Rowan and Nyra stopped their march in turn. Now less than a stone's throw away, a staring match began between siblings. Nyra looked from one brother to the other, uncertain what to make of the charged silence. This time, she wisely chose not to interrupt. It was Cassian who spoke first, tilting his head slightly as he did. "Rowan, Cassian. It's been quite a long time, hasn't it?" the king probed. "How long would you say? When last I saw you, you were just a boy, and now..." He could take it no longer. Rowan's tense expression broke in an instant, paving the way for a wide smile. "Look at how you've grown, brother!" Before anyone could object, Cassian had already crossed the distance between them. He was like a young lad, running into a bear hug with his older brother, and Rowan was an emotional older sibling whose tears fell despite his best efforts to hold them in. "I can scarce believe it. My brother, Rowan, has returned to us." Cassian left the embrace smiling from ear to ear. He shook Rowan's shoulders with his heavily accessorized hands. "Have you any idea how long we've been waiting for this day, for this moment? To be honest with you, I don't." Rowan smiled sheepishly. "But that's part of why I'm here. I'd like to find out what I've missed, and perhaps how I forgot." "Why, of course. There will be time for that, I assure you." Cassian waved a finger like a conductor as he made his way back to his throne. "But first, I see you've brought company, dear brother. Am I to be left waiting for an introduction?" "No, sorry. I'd be happy to introduce her to you." Rowan cleared his throat. "This is my friend and traveling companion, Nyra. I wouldn't have made it here without her." "Is that so?" The king sat down. "Miss Nyra, was it? How might a king offer you his thanks for escorting his only kin safely into our midst? A handsome reward, perhaps?" Rowan expected Nyra to shoot him a look that screamed, "Is this guy serious?" Instead, she curtsied respectfully, lowering her head. "No thanks are necessary, Your Majesty," she said. "In fact, it was Rowan who saved my life. Any debt he thinks he owes me has been paid off in full, and I would not ask a single thing else in return." Rowan smiled in surprise, noting the slight warmth in her cheeks. So she is capable of putting on airs, he thought, though he could tell the words themselves were genuine. "You'll forgive a brother for wishing to know the company his family keeps, but I am left with little doubt that you are a fine friend, Miss Nyra." Cassian brought his hands together in quiet approval. "Then again, I suppose any companion of our heroes would be of unyielding moral character, no?" Yeah. The look finally came. Nyra's polite smile never faltered, but her eyes slid toward Rowan with obvious trepidation. Rowan recognized that, as his cue to cut in before she would be obligated to explain her definition of moral character in explicit detail. But before he could speak, Cassian suddenly exclaimed, "Oh no, this simply won't do!" The king shouted. "Guards!" Rowan and Nyra braced themselves for what he was about to say, surprised by the sudden outburst. Nyra's hand hovered above her satchel, and whatever might be contained within. "Come remove these restraints from Rowan's wrists," he finished his thought, freezing his guests in place. "Did I not say that this man was to be treated with the utmost dignity and respect? Quickly now." A procession of guards emerged from out of nowhere, making a direct line to Rowan's side. One of them spoke a short incantation, and his anti-magic cuffs fell off, freeing his wrists from further discomfort. The guards disappeared as quickly as they had come, leaving Rowan and Nyra stunned. "You were about to interject, were you not?" Cassian smiled with his unusually white teeth. "Speak freely, Rowan. Thank you." Rowan looked at his freed wrists, mulling over what to say next. "Brother, I came because I need your help." He got to the heart of the matter. Cassian, meanwhile, didn't react much at all. "Oh?" He only asked a simple question. With what? Rowan had been given the floor, and he intended to use it to get up to speed on a number of things. But first he had to make sure of something important. "You see, the reason why Nyra and I came here first was to clear our names," Rowan explained. "I'm sure you know this by now, but we just broke out of prison, and it wasn't a pretty sight when we left." "Yes, I gathered that from the restraints and the dismally pale state of your complexion," the king noted. "My messengers have already informed me what became of Dreadmere prison, lest you worry about that. Please understand though, brother, it wasn't our intention to consider your ledger wiped clean." "Wait, huh?" Cassian waved for his scribe to draft up the official release. Nyra's mouth hung open. Meanwhile, Rowan leaned forward as if he were going to whisper, "You're not even going to ask what happened. There is nothing to be gained by dwelling on the past." Cassian shrugged, chuckling to himself. "And, dare you ask, I am also hereby expunging the criminal record of your friend there as well, by official royal decree." Even down to the last stolen coin. That detail confirmed Cassian had already investigated Nyra. "I don't really know what to say." Rowan had expected his brother to vouch for them. Of course, but with a layer of bureaucracy and protocol attached. At least a reprimand for all the destroyed property and lost life, which he himself hadn't caused, but even so. However, Cassian entertained and granted his request without a second thought. For one uneasy moment, Rowan wondered whether his brother's instant pardon amounted to an abuse of royal power. "We can reserve thanks for later." Cassian folded his hands together, studying Rowan for a moment. He looked intrigued about something. "Tell me this, instead. How much do you remember?" Rowan thought about it for a moment. There were any number of ways he could answer the question, but rather than list them all out, he decided to summarize just the most important bits. "I remember life growing up on the farm, my birth father passing away, and my mother raising us 2 siblings on her own," he began. "Then I remember Edric finding me, studying at the Lyceum, making friends, dreaming of becoming a knight, and finally, nothing, except for my prison cell." "Truly, nothing at all?" Cassian asked as his brother nodded. "How fascinating." "No, that's not quite the right word. Harrowing seems a more appropriate description," Rowan answered with a strained smile. "Only after escaping," he explained, had he learned of Edric's death. He then offered his condolences. Cassian's composure barely changed, though the revelation clearly affected him. Their father had lived a long and fruitful life, he said. Even so, the fading of such a brilliant light would always bring grief. Edric had loved Rowan dearly. He had been proud of the man Rowan became. Cassian was proud as well. Rowan thanked him, then asked about the deeds that inspired such pride. Cassian said he clearly did not need to explain that Rowan was the hero who ended the War of the Long Eclipse and defeated the fractured god. Rowan dryly observed that the statue and plaque outside had already provided that lesson. He asked whether he had become vain enough to demand his likeness across the castle grounds. That possibility seemed harder for him to believe than fighting a cosmic evil with an axe. Cassian laughed. Rowan had resisted the statue so fiercely that the royal household practically dragged him before the sculptor. He had argued that the materials and labor should be used to rebuild damaged frontier settlements instead. Cassian believed Edric would have agreed. The story sounded exactly like the young man Rowan remembered being. Aside from impossible strength, he could find few differences between himself and the hero described by others. He looked down at his hands. Then he asked the question that mattered most. If he had remained the same man, why had he ended up in chains? Cassian sighed. He had expected the question, but the answer was not meant for the ears of servants and guards. He rang a small bell and ordered everyone except Rowan and Nyra to leave. The throne room emptied immediately. Once they were alone, Cassian explained that Rowan could not understand the choice without first understanding the man who made it. To do that, they would have to return to the past. Cassian led them to an unusual stone door and cast light magic upon its central dial. The triangular mechanism turned with a grinding sound until it pointed toward an image of the Radiant One. The lock clicked. A hidden passage opened through the palace walls. Rowan and Nyra followed the king inside. With another clap, Cassian awakened a line of light crystals. The corridor lacked the extravagance of the public castle. Instead, it contained relics, weapons, trophies, personal objects, and paintings of warriors from different eras. Cassian welcomed them to the Hall of Champions, where the royal family preserved the memories of the fallen and forgotten. Rowan studied swords, shields, medals, and military insignia. Several had belonged to veterans he knew from books about the War of the Long Eclipse. Nyra eventually pointed toward the far end. There stood a suit of armor, more elaborate than anything worn by the current royal guard. Its steel was black rather than silver, and a purple jewel rested in the breastplate, matching the one in Rowan's axe. Rowan touched the cold metal. Recognition came through instinct rather than memory. The armor had belonged to him. An armored helmet with a blue plume rested nearby. Above it hung a mural depicting Rowan beside 3 companions. Cassian explained that these were the people who fought with him for 10 years and entered the fractured god's sanctuary at his side. He asked whether Rowan recognized them. 2 faces immediately awakened old memories. Garrick was a red-haired paladin carrying a shield. Miri was a small catfolk mage whose oversized robes and long staff made her look even more feline. They had been among Rowan's closest friends at the Lyceum, a group others jokingly called the Oddballs. Rowan laughed in disbelief. Apparently, he had joined his school friends on a decade-long quest to kill a god. The idea sounded ridiculous. Cassian answered that it was also true. Against impossible odds, they had returned victorious. Even Nyra studied the mural with growing respect, especially the painted image of Rowan. A 4th companion remained unfamiliar. The woman was an elf with mint green hair and deep purple eyes. Her expression was serious, but the artist had captured a distinct warmth in the way she looked at Rowan. He asked who she was. Nyra elbowed Rowan after catching him staring at the elf in the mural. By the time he turned, she had already looked away and pretended to be studying something else. Cassian explained that the elf had been chosen as Silvarin's champion and joined Rowan's party before the long campaign. He found it revealing that Rowan remembered Garrick and Miri, but not her. Rowan asked where the 3 companions were now. Garrick Emberfall still served Asterhold as a commander of the Crown Wardens, though he was currently away from the capital. Cassian did not know the location of Miri or the Elven champion. Both had insisted on continuing their work independently, and as citizens of other nations, they were free to do so. Rowan accepted that anyone who helped save the world had earned such freedom. Still, the difference troubled him. Garrick remained in service. Miri and the elf traveled as they wished. Rowan alone had lost his memories and awakened behind bars. Why was I alone made to forget it all? Rowan looped back. I think I understand a bit more of the man I once was. But that hasn't answered my question about the here and now. Why I found myself in that cell, and why years of my life are just gone. There was a moment of silence between them, as Rowan looked away, his arms at his sides. Nyra looked at Rowan, and then back at Cassian, growing tired of his riddles. Your brother is asking you for an answer, Your Majesty, if you'll forgive the interruption, Nyra said. I've avoided butting in this whole time because it's not my business, but you owe him that much, at least if you call yourself family. You're answering every question except the one he asked. Nyra, that's a little. No, Rowan, she's absolutely right. Cassian nodded thoughtfully. I know the kingdom owes you that much for your life of service. Rowan gulped as a sharp look settled in the eyes of the king. Father, never saw the end of the campaign against the fractured god, passing peacefully before you'd struck the final blow, Cassian said, his hand coming to rest on Rowan's shoulder. The aftermath of the war was to be my responsibility, as next in line for the throne, and my curse. Your curse? Indeed, he said. Tell me, when the strongest warrior in all the world runs out of enemies to defeat, what conclusion might our adversaries reach about the hero's place in the next conflict? Rowan's expression darkened. That whoever controlled the hero would win. Exactly. Cassian removed his hand from Rowan's shoulder, patting him twice on the back as he did. It was something that Rowan hadn't considered. In a perfect world, good deeds would always be rewarded with positive outcomes. However, human nature wasn't so simple. Conflicts arose all the time. And it didn't take a world-unifying evil like the fractured god to start one. A council of world leaders met to discuss the future of these lands, with a representative from every nation in attendance. Cassian continued, turning his back to the others. Some wanted limits on when and how you could be deployed, while others suggested, unthinkably, that you be disposed of permanently. You mean, to protect the peace, or their own interests perhaps? The very people you saved suggested killing you so that you couldn't become a problem later. Cassian closed his eyes. Allies and adversaries both. After everything? Rowan whispered, hints of sadness in his voice. Fear and lack of understanding could drive otherwise decent people into some desperate decisions. They threatened war against the kingdom of Alaris, and I was prepared to call their bluff, But you, Cassian looked up, a twinkle in his eye. You made a choice for the good of us all. Dear brother. I did? Rowan asked. And what sort of choice was that? You stood valiantly in front of every nation and presented the solution. Cassian gestured to Rowan's armor. You would gladly surrender your weapon, your title, and even your memories to keep the peace you had fought so hard to achieve. In other words, you'd sacrifice everything you had. Everything. And what was your role in all this? Nyra asked, her arms crossed. It's not hard to believe this well-meaning idiot would jump to a conclusion like that, but why didn't you try to stop him? As much as it killed me inside, I agreed with Rowan's opinion on the matter. Cassian smiled bitterly. And I wanted to respect his decision, as his brother, but to prevent war from breaking out, after we'd only just begun to rebuild. Nyra pursed her lips, electing not to speak further. Rowan, too, was at a loss for words. Your former companion, Miri, administered the spell, using her destruction magic to erase your memories, but only at your insistence, Cassian continued. I had you locked away. I told the people you'd made a sacrifice for the kingdom, but that was it. That was everything I said, and I let their imaginations fill in the rest. I see now. What I didn't account for was that you'd come to reunite with that axe so soon, and make your way here with half your memories intact. Cassian smiled, exasperated. Tell me, where in the world did you find it? A prison guard had it and tried to slice us up. But Rowan was a lot faster, Nyra answered before looking in on her friend with concern. Hey, buddy, are you all right? He laughed because he did not know what else to do. Most of Cassian's explanation was believable. The evidence left him little choice. One part, however, felt impossible. Rowan had not merely forgotten battles and adventures. He had lost years with his mother and sister. He had forgotten his sister growing older, and nearly all the time he had known Edric. He could not imagine willingly giving away those memories. Was there truly no other way? Cassian frowned and answered that there had not been. Rowan then asked about his family. If they were safe, he would accept the choice and try to move forward. Cassian said the question sounded familiar. Under the agreement they made, royal guards had been stationed near the Halcrest hamlet. Remnants of the fractured gods' armies still threatened the western frontier. But no harm had reached Rowan's family. Rowan pressed him for certainty and asked whether Cassian had visited them personally. The king hesitated only slightly before saying yes, Nyra noticed. Cassian added that he had recently arranged another delivery of supplies to the farm. Then he revealed that Rowan's sister was expecting a child. Joy broke through Rowan's confusion. He was going to become an uncle. Nyra heard the news repeated with the delight of someone discovering the world for the first time. Cassian finally smiled without restraint and confirmed it. He led them back toward the throne room before the servants convinced themselves that their king had been murdered inside the hidden passage. The tension eased into laughter as they retraced their steps. Rowan looked once more at the black armor he had worn as the hero, then he left it behind. When the stone door opened, the waiting knights and servants straightened with visible relief. Cassian apologized for the delay. Meanwhile, Rowan's thoughts raced ahead. His sister was truly having a child, and he might already have a nephew or niece waiting for him at home. This is all so exciting. Rowan regained a bit of the color he'd lost as they came to stand where they had before. Now that we've negotiated our freedom, I can get back to them. Does that mean what I think it means, pal? Nyra asked. It does, Rowan nodded, grinning softly. What's this? Cassian asked from his throne, one leg crossed over the other. You seem lighter all of a sudden. What has inspired such a positive change in your mood, brother? I'd have thought all this information would leave you feeling ambivalent. And here you are with a smile. You'll get used to it, Nyra laughed. Nothing keeps Rowan in the dumps for more than a minute. As weird as it sounds, the guy could flip anything into a positive. Well, I suppose that's true, but what was it you said before, Cassian? Rowan asked, with a hopeful look. That we shouldn't dwell on the past? That got me thinking about the future. And what I want to do next. Rowan suddenly bowed his head deeply, as if asking for a big favor. In the past, I served this kingdom faithfully as a knight, and I completed my mission as a hero. Without looking up, he continued to speak. There's only one thing that I want. It may be selfish of me, but I'd ask regardless. If your heart is settled, I'd like to hear it. Rowan smiled bigger than he had all day. I want to go home. Are you sure you want to leave things like that? Rowan and Nyra walked through one of Asterhold's empty cobbled roads. It had grown quite late, so only lamplight and the hearths glowing from open windows lit the streets. Like what? Refusing your brother's offer to house us for the night, Nyra replied. Tonight? Or tomorrow? It doesn't make that much of a difference when we get on the road, does it? The temperature was pleasantly warm, with a light breeze blowing Nyra's short hair around. It caught the winglets on her head, making it seem like she'd pick up and fly away at any moment. Rowan thought the sight was a little funny. I suppose it doesn't, but, Rowan thought ahead. To his eventual reunion with his family. I just couldn't help myself. I'm excited to see them again. Yeah. Nyra nodded, crossing her hands behind the back of her head in her usual fashion. I was just saying, it'll be a long ride out there. I get it though. That it will, Rowan agreed. It was nice enough of my brother to get us a stagecoach this late that can take us to the western frontier. I'd hate to impose any further than that. He remembered the smile his brother wore as he watched them leave from his throne, his gaze never breaking from them until the massive doors had slammed shut. Somehow, I knew you were going to say that. Nyra sighed deeply. But it's all right. We can sleep a bit on the way, if it's not too rough. Nyra walked out slightly ahead. Curfew had almost fallen on the city, and people were returning to their homes. A mother carried her sleeping child in her arms, and warm laughter came from the window of a home. Her footsteps slowed until Rowan passed her by. Noticing she'd stopped, he turned to look back without saying anything. Can I ask you something, Rowan? Sure. He turned to face her fully. What is it? Do you resent him? Nyra looked down. Who? My brother. When Nyra nodded, Rowan stopped to think. No. Even though you haven't remembered anything? Nyra crossed her arms. What if he was lying to you? About what? Anything, I guess. She didn't know what she wanted to say. Exactly. It had just come tumbling out. Don't you want your memories back? Would you? Rowan asked, as Nyra silently shook her head. That man is gone, Nyra. The titles, the glory, and every sacrifice that came with it. There's nothing for me back there, and the world has no more need for heroes. They made that perfectly clear. That was an answer Nyra could accept, but she suspected there was more to it than he let on. There was also the matter of national security. Though Cassian hadn't asked him directly, Rowan could safely assume drawing unwanted attention would be bad for everyone involved. So, what happens now? Nyra asked casually. I suppose I become a farmer again. Rowan laughed at his own expense. Farmer Rowan? Wearing overalls and the whole deal? Nyra scoffed. And a bad tan? Maybe. He smiled. My mother always worried about me being in the capital, so she'll be happy to see me back safe. And my sister might need help with the baby. The old windmill needed repairing, not to mention the fence. Hey, Rowan. Nyra's voice was almost frail. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. This repeated several times until Rowan finally tilted his head. If it wouldn't be too much trouble. Could I? A glint from a nearby rooftop stopped her. Terror crossed Nyra's face. She released a burst of wind into Rowan's chest and threw him aside, just as an arrow crossed the street. The projectile tore through her second gust and struck her left arm. Rowan hit the ground and watched in shock. Nyra pulled the arrow free. Blood ran down her arm as she pressed wind into the wound, drawing out dark fluid. The arrow had been poisoned. She ordered Rowan to run. He remained stunned until she seized his wrist and dragged him upright. Once his legs responded, they sprinted through the lamplit streets. Nyra could have escaped more quickly alone, but she refused to abandon him. Rowan, despite carrying the heavy axe and suffering from months of malnutrition, ran far faster than an ordinary man. They turned into an alley. Two black-clad figures dropped silently ahead of them. Nyra stopped and told Rowan to retreat, but two more landed behind them and sealed the exit. Rowan drew his axe and asked whether the attackers were bounty hunters. Nyra recognized the precision of their movement. They were not adventurers. They were professional killers from the Obsidian Court. An assassin threw a knife. Rowan blocked it with the broadside of his axe while the four enemies spread out around them. Their purpose was obvious. They attacked together. One moved low for Rowan's legs, while another swung a chained flail toward his head. The same buried instincts that had guided him against the warden took control. Rowan drove the lower end of his axe into the first attacker and pinned him against the stone. He trapped the flail's chain, twisted with unnatural strength, and hurled the second assassin into a stack of wooden crates. Nyra wrapped herself in wind and crossed the alley in a blur. She struck a third attacker against the wall, evaded his desperate counterattack, and vaulted over the spearman charging behind him. The spearman did not slow. His thrust struck his own companion. Nyra recoiled at the assassin's complete disregard for an ally, then returned to Rowan's side. Within moments, only the spearman remained standing. He tore his weapon free and charged. Rowan redirected the point into the ground with the edge of his axe. Nyra followed with a hard kick that knocked the man unconscious. The alley fell silent. Then the assassin Rowan had thrown into the crates moved behind Nyra. Rowan saw the dagger rising toward her neck. He whispered a prayer for forgiveness and swung. The attacker fell before reaching her. Nyra looked from Rowan to the bodies around them. She thanked him and observed that the assassin had convincingly played dead. Rowan asked whether the fight was over. Nyra hoped so, but refused to remain long enough to learn otherwise. They moved through several narrow alleys, trying to avoid both open streets and another enclosure. Close combat had favored them. Exposing themselves to more poisoned arrows would not. Eventually, they had to cross a main road to reach the Western Transportation Depot or one of the nearby stables. They paused beneath a shallow stone arch. Nyra bent forward in pain. Rowan urged her to slow down. She pointed to the blood trail behind them. The assassins could follow it no matter how quickly they moved. The wound continued bleeding. Worse, black lines had begun spreading beneath the skin of her arm. Rowan recognized pit viper venom. He had treated similar bites in the Halcrest hamlet and offered to heal her. Nyra asked what level of holy magic he could use. Rowan remembered being an intermediate-class holy mage, though he had no memory of formal training beyond that. Nyra rejected the spell. It would take too long, and Rowan needed to preserve his mana for whatever waited ahead. Then she asked what he would say if she ordered him to leave her behind. Rowan answered instantly. He would become angry. A faint smile touched Nyra's face. She had expected exactly that answer. If Rowan refused to abandon her, she refused to become helpless weight. She searched her satchel and removed a small rubber sphere with a string. Inside was grey powder. Rowan asked what she intended to do. Nyra distracted him by asking whether killing the assassin had truly been his first experience taking a life. Rowan admitted it was not. It had happened before he became the hero. The necessity never became easier, especially when an enemy left no other choice. Nyra's fingers shook above the powder. She told Rowan that he had done what survival required. Then she pressed the powder against the wound. Because Rowan was too stubborn to leave her, she said, she was not permitted to surrender either. She struck a match. Rowan realized her plan and tried to stop her. Nyra warned him to cover his nose. The powder ignited with a sharp blast beneath the arch. Smoke filled the air. Nyra forced down a scream as the heat sealed the wound. Her knees gave way. Rowan caught her and held her upright. The injury was terrible, but the bleeding had stopped far more quickly than his. Slow healing spell could have managed in the open. Nyra steadied herself with one hand on Rowan's arm and told him they had to continue. A smooth voice answered from the darkness. "Going so soon?" The pair froze. The depot was close, but black-clad assassins dropped from the arch and nearby roofs until more than a dozen blocked the path ahead. Rowan gripped the axe with both hands. They were surrounded. Nyra, however, stared behind them. Her eyes followed the blood trail into the darkness. A distant silhouette approached, and the air seemed colder with every step. 4 wasn't enough. The figure spoke again with an unsettling tone. Not quite masculine, but not feminine either. He looked human enough that Rowan could call him a man. His posture was slightly hunched, almost lazy. Only when he stepped closer did Rowan realize each hand held a curved scythe low by his knees. I wasn't told to expect much of a fight, though. The stranger was unnaturally tall and thin, with pale skin and jet black hair slicked so close to his scalp that it almost looked painted on. black lips curled into a smile that exposed sharpened teeth filed to points. "Who are you?" Rowan asked. Unlike the uniformed assassins, this one had a leather halter top adorned with buckles and pockets for vials of liquids Rowan didn't recognize. Black pants and heavy-soled black boots finished the look. "My name is Vesper." Only then did Rowan notice the enormous black sword resting across Vesper's back as he came to stand just a few paces away from him and Nyra, whose eyes wavered. "And what do you want?" Rowan asked hesitantly. "Me? I want nothing for myself. I simply go where I'm told. And I was told to come here and kill you, hero." Vesper's words hung in the night air, like a guillotine over their necks. "I'm not the hero anymore. I've left that life behind." Rowan tried to parley. "You've no reason to chase us any longer." A gravelly laugh escaped Vesper's throat. "You think you get to decide that?" He shook his head. "No, it doesn't matter what you call yourself now. A contract is a contract. Once you're dead, we'll leave." "Then why'd you injure Nyra?" He gestured to his friend who still shook with fear. "Is she in your contract too? The girl should know." "My arrow only hit her because she got in the way," Vesper reasoned. "Had she taken off without you, we'd have left her be. I don't work for free." Rowan considered the weight of his words and what they implied. They saved each other, so he didn't feel a sense of debt. But if simply being around him would put her in further danger, that was absolutely something he had to take into account. "In that case," Rowan began, "allow me to take you on by myself." As Rowan stepped forward with his axe, Nyra reached out to grab his arm with a shaky hand. She shook her head no, trying to catch her breath. "He's different, Rowan," Nyra said. "He's not like the others." "In what way, huh?" The question itself was baffling to Nyra. Nyra wondered how Rowan could fail to feel the crushing pressure surrounding Vesper. Vesper had not moved. If he had blinked, neither of them noticed. The assassins blocking the road also remained still, and several seemed almost frightened of the tall man commanding them. Rowan understood that Vesper stood far above the others. Even so, the killers would not stop until either Vesper or Rowan died. Vesper had said as much. The assassin agreed and waited for their decision. Nyra released Rowan's arm and moved to stand beside him. She was injured, poisoned, burned, and exhausted. Her choice was still enough to make Rowan smile. He told her to guard his back while he held the front. Nyra agreed. They spread apart and approached Vesper from opposite sides. The assassin invited them to begin. Rowan charged first. His axe crossed the space where Vesper's head had been, but the man ducked beneath it. Nyra followed with a wind-enhanced punch. Vesper redirected her arm and kicked her between the shoulders, sending her into a roll. Rowan attacked with the sharpened end of the axe haft. Vesper flipped backward, landed while moving forward, and crossed both scythes toward Rowan's torso. Rowan possessed greater raw strength, but Vesper controlled every exchange. Each movement was precise and wasted nothing. Refusing to surrender the rhythm, Rowan pressed harder. Nyra recovered, used the stone arch as a launching point, and dived toward Vesper with a kick. He blocked the impact with one forearm. The collision released a burst of air. His second scythe immediately swept toward Nyra's leg. Rowan trapped Vesper's arm with the axe handle and drove his forehead into the assassin's face. Vesper staggered half a step. Blood touched his nose. He tasted it with a long tongue and smiled. Rowan felt disturbed for a reason beyond the man's indifference to pain. The resistance beneath the strike had not felt like a human body. Vesper smiled with pointed teeth. Then he announced that their time was over. The waiting assassins entered the battle. Nyra was forced away to keep them from overwhelming Rowan. She shouted that there were too many and ordered him to retreat. Vesper threw aside his scythes. The thin muscles beneath his pale skin tightened, and he crossed the distance with explosive speed. He attacked Rowan with his bare hands. Even when his knuckles split against the flat of the axe, Vesper did not slow. Hooks and uppercuts struck Rowan's body and face faster than Nyra could follow. Rowan reacted through instinct, changing position with every impact. But the outcome became increasingly clear. Vesper ended the assault with a kick to Rowan's chest. The larger man flew backward, struck the wall, and lost his axe across the cobblestones. His vision faded in and out. Nyra's voice reached him through the ringing in his ears. Another voice rose beneath it. "Pick it up." Rowan reached toward the axe and failed. His swollen eyes barely opened. Blood marked his mouth, and his body refused to obey. He could not accept collapsing when home was finally within reach. Nyra retreated to his side. The assassins surrounded them, but waited for Vesper to decide the final moment. Vesper asked whether weakness frustrated Rowan. "It should," he said. "No one should accept it. Least of all the hero." Nyra shouted that Rowan was not weak. No person she knew possessed greater strength. Vesper did not disagree. Strong people still died when their bodies could not carry the ideals they demanded of themselves. Nyra rejected the claim and desperately searched for a solution. Pain from her wounded arm gave her one. She removed the remaining sack of coins and displayed it openly. Vesper asked whether she intended to bribe him and doubted the amount would be enough. Nyra knelt in front of Rowan with her back to the assassins. The gesture exposed her, but the younger killers were already focused on the money. In the underworld, victory granted the spoils. Whoever killed Nyra would claim everything she carried. Vesper understood the trick before his subordinates did. Nyra removed her satchel and leaned close to Rowan. When she gave the signal, he was to run. Rowan smelled sulfur and saw a match glowing in her hand. He understood. Nyra placed the coin sack in his lap. Rowan hid it behind him without looking. Then she turned toward the assassins, held up the satchel, and asked whether they wanted what was inside. A concentrated gust threw the bag against the lower edge of the arch. The least disciplined killers leaped for it, fighting one another for possession. The rest hesitated. Nyra shouted the signal. The satchel exploded. Stone collapsed from the arch. Assassins scattered beneath the debris while Rowan and Nyra ran through the opening. Rowan carried the axe in one hand and Nyra's money in the other. He limped after her as falling rock filled the street. Nyra avoided the men who reached for her and flashed a grin. They should have learned by then. No one could catch Nyra. Rowan drove through anyone blocking his path. Vesper remained beneath the arch as a massive section of stone broke loose above him. He looked up and acknowledged that Nyra had played the situation well. The stone crashed down and buried him. Rowan and Nyra did not look back. They moved through alleys, changing direction repeatedly. Nyra stole 2 heavy cloaks from a clothesline and used them to conceal their appearance. Rowan did not have the energy to object. The destruction blocked the fastest route to the Western Depot and forced them toward the opposite side of Asterhold. They needed any wagon that could carry them away before the Obsidian Court regrouped. Both were injured and exhausted. Finding transport at such a late hour seemed nearly impossible, and Cassian's arranged stagecoach could not help them from across the city. Then Rowan noticed a warm light. A covered wagon stood in a side street with a lamp hanging from its frame. It did not belong to any transport company they recognized, but they climbed into the rear among boxes and supplies. The driver demanded to know what they were doing. Nyra threw him the entire sack of coins and told him to take them as far as the money would buy. Rowan almost objected, then remained silent as she surrendered everything she had protected for so long. The driver seemed more puzzled than frightened. He asked where they wanted to go. Nyra answered that anywhere beyond Asterhold would be enough, provided they left quickly. The man agreed without further questions. When they asked whether he would truly help, the bells of his jester's cap jingled softly as he nodded in the darkness. The driver chuckled and said their escape might become a fine story one day. He knew where to take them, though the journey would be long. Nyra said that suited her perfectly. Hours later, 2 city guards stood beneath the ruined arch and wondered what force had caused so much destruction. Neither had an answer. They searched through the rubble while waiting for reinforcements and the city crews that would arrive after sunrise. From a nearby rooftop, a thin man watched through a looking glass with his legs swinging lazily over the edge. Vesper observed the damage and admitted that he might have gone too far. An assassin appeared beside him and knelt on the tiles. The rookie reported that the hero had escaped. The Obsidian Court tracked Rowan and Nyra to the eastern districts, where both suddenly disappeared. Vesper lowered the looking glass and ordered the operation ended for the night. They would attempt the contract again later. The assassin hesitated. Rowan and Nyra were both weakened. He could not understand why they were not continuing the pursuit. Vesper asked him to repeat the contractor's instructions. The first order had been to complete the assassination by any means necessary. Vesper asked for the second. The Obsidian Court was also required to maintain a low profile. Vesper gestured toward the collapsed arch and the guards surrounding it. Nothing about the knight's work could be called discreet. He had tested their targets and learned that the original intelligence underestimated them. That was enough for now. In particular, the harpy had surprised him. Vesper searched his memory for her name and recalled the parting words spoken before Rowan and Nyra destroyed the magical duplicate that had fought them. "You can't catch Nyra." A slow smile crossed Vesper's pale face. "Nyra," he murmured. "We'll see about that."